In the opening of manhwa we can see a troupe is going with a carriage. The carriage look lavish. Inside the carriage there is a beautiful woman. The woman, she is Princess Adelaide Gotrov of Gotrov Empire. She is a powerful mage who can single-handed defeat Monster Tower. She is thinking about her encounter with her mother before she is going out from her empire. Her mother said go and become the Empress of Ichmont. Princess replied that her mother looked anxious to tolerate her presence there. Her mother said she thought that will accept this proposal. She is wrong. Princess isn't distress. Princess mother whisper in her ears that does she not regret that day every single time that day if she had left her little brother to die then she could become an emperor. Princess flinch and please stop it mother. Her mother said does not princess think that she owned one and only her little brother. Mother said of course she is loyal to him. It shows her mother clearly don't like her and favors hide little brother. Her mother said her existence to the empire you just like a knife on a jaw for the sheikh of empire and her little brother she should leave this empire and can go become empress of another empire. Scene shift now princess is watching a photo in name of her future husband. His name is Karl Ulrich Ichmont of Ichmont Empire. She noticed a paper lying on the floor. On that paper is written the emperor has already a mistress. Her name is Diana Poitiers and she is 29-year-old. This information princess doesn't know. No princess is thinking then she can only reach to the continent and leave her homeland after crossing deep and rough ocean. She can't return to her homeland and where she is going there is no trust. The land is very far and she has to become the empress of another empire. In palace Emperor Karl Ulrich Ichmont of Ichmont Empire, he is watching princess portrait before her arrival. His thinking.
When someone send their prospective groom their photo, they usually draw themselves sitting calmly with gentle smile on their face, right? But she is sending him the message that she will come as an empress, not my woman. I can clearly feel her influence from this portrait. It's a pity. It's better for both of us if she were to come as a woman.
After a month later princess arrived to empire. Lionel Valgier, the second son of Duke Valgier. He is the Minister of Ministry of Defense and Captain of Royal Guard. He and his guards saw princess carriages coming.
There, I think they're almost here.
Yes, I saw them. Let's prepare to department.
How long will it be before we arrive?
The gate we are seeing right now is the first gate. Since we need to pass through the second gate, it will take another before we arrive, Your Highness.
Princess think seems like I have to change clothes. Lionel arrived. He introduced himself. I am Minister of Ministry of Defense and Captain of Royal Guards and I am here to escort Her Highness. Princess Aide opened the door. As soon as door is opened the minister is surprised to see the princess. She is in wearing her gown. She is wearing horse riding clothes. He saw her golden eyes and felt enchanted to it. He thought they are such rare ones. He escort her out of her carriage. Princess said you went out of your way to welcome me. Thank you. My name is Adelaide Gotrov. For a moment he is mesmerized by her presence and stopped for a moment. Princess said it's quite strenuous to ride a carriage and a boat for a 2 whole month. Do you perhaps have any sphere horse? Lionel, are you asking a horse? Princess, so the first can ride it. Lionel thinking a horse riding, that's why she changed her clothes, causes it strange for noble women to wear such clothes at first meeting. Your Highness, the war horses are fierce so it would be dangerous, soldier said. Princess said how dare you harbor such a concern for a princess of Gotrov. Princess took that dangerous horse and rider it with her full confidence. All soldiers and Lionel is stunned and thinks God heaven that's why she was very confident about it. She has excellent horse riding skills. Princess praised the horse, good job. Lionel, Your Highness, do you feel relieved now, Your Highness? Princess reply, yes, thank you. All thought I would like to write some more. I guess it will be a bit troublesome if I were to arrive at palace wearing this. Lionel suggest Your Highness please ride in your carriage from here now. He thought otherwise it would be scandalous for Crown Princess to arrive at palace in such manner. You said your name is Lionel, was there right? Thank you. I could get over the boring journey. I hope we can go horse riding together someday. Princess thanks Lionel. Lionel flinch and thought Princess Adelaide of Gotrov Empire, such a unique person, is going to become empress. Scene shifts in the palace. Emperor is working when his aide came and wants audience with him. Emperor ask what is wrong? Maid, my lady wants favor from you, Your Majesty. In Ivory Palace of Emperor Mistress is picking up some jewelry and crown. While picking up, Duchess Ulrich Grand arrived. She's the stepsister of the emperor, and the only female member of the royal family of Ulrich. Mistress welcomed her and asked what's bring your grace here to Ivory Palace. Duchess asked what of this did His Majesty give you these? You think that you wouldn't even need permission to take out the royal treasurer. No, that's impossible, Mistress replied. I was just choosing the Empress crown for the marriage ceremony. Duchess Empress crown? Crown chosen, that's been chosen by personally Mistress. I am worried Gotroy's officials will floods with protest letters if they hear about this rather than a crown chosen by the Mistress. Isn't it better if it's chosen by the sister-in-law? Mistress laughed and said, I apologize. As the only divorced woman in the empire, I am not sure if you have the right to choose. As you may know, our empire forbids a divorced woman to host a wedding. Duchess shouted and said, this is insolent. Then suddenly Emperor arrived. He smashed the door aggressively, then shout, what's happening? The Mistress smirks and thinks the Emperor came just in time as she planned. She said in sad tone, Your Majesty, you have arrived. Somehow Emperor doesn't look pleased. Duchess thinks just now she was boldly cunning and now this fox changed in weak women. Emperor asks, what's happening? Duchess reply, are you looking for your mistress rather than managing state affairs? You won't believe it, but I haven't done anything. The Mistress starts shedding crocodile tears. Oh God, it's just beginning and she is on my nerves. Emperor asked they why she is just like this. Mistress said, it's all right, Your Majesty, Her Grace hasn't done anything wrong. It's all because I am lacking. Look like we have another trashta. Mistress said, I'm doing my best to prepare for Your Majesty's wedding, but Her Grace was not satisfied with the preparations. Duchess said, right, Tilda, so that's what happened. I have somehow become a mean sister-in-law who picks on an innocent person again. Seems like I have no right to say anything. Even though your cherished mistress is trying to show off her authority in pretense of preparing the wedding ceremony. Emperor in taunting tone said, show off her authority right now. We have no suitable royal lady who can host the wedding ceremony. Should not we instead be grateful to her for volunteering to do it herself? Especially you, Duchess Grant. Duchess is angry. Are you now blaming me for my divorce? Emperor, let's stop this. This is my last warning. I am the one who put Diana in charge of the wedding ceremony's preparations, so you have no say about this. Just follow her decisions, are we clear? Duchess is furious. She said, well, I too don't want to see this sight ever again. I will head back to my fief as soon as the ceremony is over. Emperor left the room. As soon as Emperor left, the pretty face of Mistress changed and she glanced at Duchess and she also left the room. Duchess flinch. She sit on the sofa, her head spin. She is thinking His Majesty the son of Empire. The closer are to him, the more light they'll receive. Even though she is His Majesty's older sister, she really can't think it will be alright if you upset him, causes his mistress is now only person Emperor matters. Duchess is shocked that how much she can manipulate the Emperor. This much I don't know if the new Empress will be able to hang on. Scene shift. The Emperor is lying on his mistress' lap instead of going in his office. His mistress said, Your Majesty, you have to go now, while stroking his hairs. Emperor, let me stay like this little bit more. His mistress thinks, ah, he's so beautiful. His forehead, eyelashes, nose, lips. There's not a single part of him I don't like. Karl Ulrich Eichmont, he is perfect like his name. While crying she is saying, this person is mine, I intention of sharing him with anyone else. Her teardrops drop on Emperor face. He quickly get up and saw her crying. He asked what happened. She said, forgive me, Your Majesty, while crying. He said, are you still hurt by Duchess Grant's words? No, it is not that. I was just thinking, what should I do if the Empress is displeased with me? Would it be better for me to leave the palace if that'd make Your Majesty more comfortable? Then Emperor said she didn't need to worry, Empress will not harm her. Mistress, I apologize, Your Majesty, I feel like I always stand in the way of your future. Well, of course you are. Mistress, however, Your Majesty, you're the only one I want in my life. Even if you were to take an Empress, I am fine with just being by your side. But she thinks something else. I will never let anyone steal you from me, even if it's the Empress. Scene shift. Now Mistress is in her room. Her brother is also present there. He said, you even chose His Majesty's coat. There's not much time left before the Emperor's wedding. You can control your emotions well. Mistress noticed, there is new maid. I have never seen you before. Lift your face. Light blonde hair, deep blue eyes, although she is not that noticeably beautiful. Both of you leave. Need to talk privately with my big brother. I told you not to allow anyone with blonde hair and blue eyes become a maid. Her brother said, do you even know how common people who have blonde hair and blue eyes are? If we exclude all of them, do you think we'll be able to pick a maid? Mistress, still, you have to do as I tell you. Do you understand? All right, okay. And be careful with your words in front of the maids. If you can't even do that, don't come looking for me in the future. Brother said anyway, let me ask you one thing, do you really think you can hang on the Empress is the Princess of Gotrov? What do you mean? I know His Majesty can't live without you, but even if he can, he still won't grant you the title of Empress. There's no way the Empress would let you, His Majesty's lover, off. She has to let people know her position in the palace. I've heard rumors say she is exceptionally beautiful. This is why I have always told you to get pregnant before his marriage so you. Mistress shouts on her brother. She said, do you think it's as easy as it sounds? The Empress would not be granted anything by His Majesty. His brother flinch and ask what? She replied that Emperor hate the word Empress. His brother asked, what are you talking about? Mistress replies, I am saying that the reason why His Majesty can't make me an Empress is because he loves me. Brother said, what kind of bullshit is that? You don't know men love can grow cold. Emperor love can become anytime cold to her. Mistress said she knows. Sure. Love for the living can become cold, however love for dead cannot grow old. His Majesty see his mother in her. Wait listeners, what the shit she is talking? His mother, who passed away prematurely due to the former Empress prosecution. That's why the word, Empress, itself is something he hates. Do you still think his love would ever grow cold after hearing that? Her is his little brother in shock. Rather than an Empress who only has her status, it's better to be a mistress who has both love and power in her hands. Scene shift. The day after Adelaide arrived at the royal palace, people lined up to welcome her. They wanted to leave a good impression on the person who would soon become their Empress. However, after the parade of greetings came to an end, when it became late in the evening, there were still no news of the Emperor. The servants are also shocked. Princess think in the end he would not came. She informed the servants, I am tired. I will take a warm bath and retire for the day. If anyone visits, send them back and tell them to come back tomorrow. After that she went to take a bath. When Princess came from bathroom, she saw someone is there in her room. Who is she? This is bedchamber. It's common courtesy for all visitors to be guided to the drawing room to wait there. So how is this woman, who is not the owner of this bedchamber, waiting here so brazenly? Greetings, Your Highness, my name is Diana Poitiers. Princess. Ah, Emperor Mistress. Princess, ignore her. And instruct her maid, my clothes are all wet, hurry up and dry my hair. Her maid understood, Your Highness. Mistress is relieved. She thought her face isn't emperor type. Unintentionally Mistress smirks. Princess noticed that Mistress smirks. Mistress said, let me dry your hair, Your Highness. Are you a maid? No, I am not, Your Highness. Then why did you say you want to dry my hair? And moreover, if you're not a maid, why are you here in my bedchamber without my permission? I am sorry, Your Highness, if it displeases you. However, I want to inform you of something, Your Highness. Princess, regarding what? Mistress, regarding His Majesty preference. Princess is kinda shocked. She is thinking what the hell she is talking about. What did she just say? Mistress said, I came here because I thought you would be curious about His Majesty's preferences. Your Highness, he likes wavy hairs. However, since you have straight hair, how about trying to roll your hair to make it wavy? And you look too pale. How about applying some makeup to make your cheeks more rosy? Princess is pissed off. She is now angry. She grabbed Mistress' hair by her hand and said, how dare she talk like that to her? In angry tone, Princess said, preference. You said preference. Then Princess leave her hair and ask her maiden to bring her wine. I heard that each month is famous for its homebrewed wine. I am curious. I will drink a glass and sleep soundly after that. Maid understood, Your Highness. Princess asked, why are you giving me that kind of advice that I didn't even ask for, and then being needlessly sincere about it? That's because Mistress said, I am sure you'll be asking about His Majesty's preferences. That's why I gave you this inform. Princess in annoying tone said, are you, perhaps, the kind of person who enjoys going around telling people about another person's preferences? Then can you go and tell His Majesty about my preferences? I like a man who knows how to speak about private issues in person. Ah. And one more thing, not once in my life have I thought of changing to suit another person's preferences. That's why it is all right not to share the Emperor's preferences with me. Those preferences, just keep it to yourself. Now you can go. Still, Mistress has to say something. I think I made a mistake because I was too excited to meet you. Your Highness, please forgive me. Princess, well, you don't really need to apologize. Then I hope you'll have a comfortable rest. Please feel free to me if there's anything uncomfortable for you. I have instructed them to make no mistakes whilst obliging you. I will excuse myself now. Instructed Princess thinks Mistress words them to make no mistakes in obliging me. Isn't that what the house owner says to their visitors, to be greeted by the Emperor's mistress as soon as I arrive? It's ridiculous. Karl Ulrich Eichmont in angry tone. Day of the wedding, the emperor had never looked for a prospective bride all this time. This rumor has spread all over the palace like wildfire. Princess Adelaide said, "What a romantic emperor we have here, one that's deeply in love with this." He's saying that Diana Poitiers is the one responsible for all the palace's affairs. Right, and I am the stumbling block between them. While Princess was talking to herself, the maiden came and informed that this is the platinum crown you will be wearing for the ceremony. Your Highness, would you like to try it? Princess Adelaide tried the crown. She quickly realized Mistress Diana gave this crown her on purpose. Anyone can clearly see that crown doesn't suit her and her golden eyes. Princess Adelaide asked, "Is there a golden crown rather than a silver-colored crown? A golden crown would ship me more. I still have some time before the ceremony, so I would like to change the crown." Scene shifts. We can see that Mistress Diana is with Emperor Karl. She is shaking in front of him. Karl asks what happened. Mistress start cry and lean on Emperor Karl and said, "I am sorry, I am really sorry, Your Majesty." Meanwhile, Emperor Karl is thinking someone small and fragile, just like her, comes to mind. The one who made me want to protect her from being called Empress, and at the same time, makes me want to look away whenever the word Empress appears. It makes me feel sick. Diana said, "Her Majesty Princess is really noble and beautiful for her. It's no wonder that she thought that I was just one of the maids." Diana thinks the Emperor's biological mother was also the Empress' maid. Diana plans works and Emperor Karl is interested what happened to her. Karl said, "A maid? Didn't you say that nothing happened on the day you went to greet her?" Diana said, "Nothing happens, it just Your Majesty. I was just a bit sad that I couldn't answer her when she asked me who I was charged. I'm fine with just being by your side, but it seems that I'm getting too greed." Then Diana pretend to faint and Emperor shout her name, "Diana." Breath. Diana slowly breath. "Is there anyone outside? Hurry up and call for the physician. Hurry." Diana while crying, "You can't throw me away. Please don't throw me away, Your Majesty." Then scene shift to marriage place. Guests are whispering within them, why hasn't His Majesty shown without any notice no matter what's going on? Isn't this his own marriage ceremony? Is it possible that Lady Poitiers is stopping him from coming anyway? I feel pity for the bride standing there all by herself. Princess Adelaide thinks, damn it, did he plan to make her look ridiculous on purpose? Princess Adelaide thought, I have anyone to ask, nor anyone who would tell me what's happening. I feel as if I'm being thrown into the enemy's territory fully unarmed. Princess Adelaide thought about her nanny words while she was leaving the country. Your Highness, please remember in that place you have no one to trust except yourself. Please keep in your mind that you are the only one who can protect your honor and dignity. Nanny, you have to get it together even more right now, Adelaide. Princess Adelaide called servant. You there, go and get me a chair. I'll have a seat until His Majesty comes. She thought all the nobles present are waiting while seated, so why should I stand? It just looks pathetic. All guests are curious and whispering, what do you think the future Empress is going to do? I have no idea. Why is a chair? It cannot be. A bride waiting for His Majesty remains seated. All guests are witnessing Princess Power move and whispering. Lionel elder brother said her aura is amazing. She flipped the situation to her favor so easily. Princess Adelaide and Lionel eyes meet. Princess, that person Lionel Valgier? They took a little glance at each other. Guests are mesmerized by her aura and beauty. Oh my god, she's so gorgeous you can't take your eyes off her. She made that chair regal in an instant. Duchess thought she made the nobles under control in just one move. She thought this is right time. Duchess, should we use this chance to go and greet Her Majesty? Greeting Your Majesty, my name is Elizabeth Ulrich Grand. I've always wanted to see you. August Ulrich, it is a personal honor to meet you. My name is August Ulrich Davenel. Princess replied, despite your polite introductions, I am not really sure how I should introduce myself. It would be great if the ceremony starts soon, so I would be able to confidently introduce myself to both of you. I'm Adelaide, someone who wants to hurry up and become an Ulrich. Duchess, you already look like this empire's empress now. August Ulrich, it will be completely fine to confidently say that you are an Ulrich each month. All guests agree with Duchess and August Ulrich's statement. That's right, Your Majesty. Princess, please be seated. Seems like we shall have to wait a little longer for His Majesty. Duchess thought of Princess' humble yet powerful aura. She's really exceptional. She just simply offered HS a seat, but with that, She showed who has the higher rank in this place. I am curious to see Karl's face if he were to see this sight. Then servant announced, all rise for His Majesty the Emperor. Emperor came in. He saw Princess Adelaide and shocked that she's seating. She's seated? Princess ordered the servant, you may remove the chair. Servant understood, Your Majesty the Empress. Emperor took a glance at Princess and thought, she's, without a doubt to my surprise, the very embodiment of an empress. I wonder if that's why he feel more disgusted. Princess greetings. She thought this man is Emperor Karl Ulrich Eichmont, a graceful face. The portrait didn't do his beauty justice, but how come he looks so cold-hearted? He's the one who came late. I feel tired already. Servant, Your Majesty, this bouquet is to be held in your hands. Another servant, please walk down the aisle holding Her Majesty's hand. Your Majesty. Emperor glanced at Princess Adelaide, but the Emperor refused to hold the Empress' hand when walking down the aisle. Witnessing this Emperor rude behavior, uproar among the all-Nobel guests happen. Guests, oh my, what on earth? Princess shocked and tremble, but she collect herself and enclam herself. Servant, Your Majesty, the bouquet. Princess, it's not needed. Emperor walked 2 steps forward from her bride. When they both came to aisle, Emperor said to Princess, don't get greedy, don't stop and keep walking. Princess confused and asked, what do you mean by that? Emperor, I heard you asked Diana Poitiers if she's a maid. Princess replied, of course I would question her since she was in someone's bedchamber without permission. Emperor, Diana Poitiers isn't a maid, so please don't make such a rude mistake ever again. In cold voice, I won't spend our first night with you, so don't wait for me. Priest voice, with that this couple shall follow God's will to each other and become a good example for many people. Princess glanced at Emperor and thought God's will is the Emperor's attitude of placing boundaries by saying I'm not his wife. As soon as we got married, written somewhere on God's will? Priest, I inform you in front of God, that from now on Adelaide Gottrov has become Adelaide Ulrich Eichmont. Princess is devastated and thought, damn it, I've now passed the point of no return. In the previous chapter, the Emperor embarrassed our main heroine during the wedding ceremony. Now, in the Ivory Palace, Diane was looking out the window at the Empress Palace. Is the ceremony over? She asked. Yes, a maid replied. Diane was relieved. Can you eat something now? You've skipped meals for several days already. A maid asked, trying to get Diane to eat something. Diane's face contorted at the question. She frowned and looked back at the maid, and at her sharp gaze, the maid shrank back. Another maid said, what are you talking about? Do you think she has been intentionally skipping her meals? Purple maid hesitantly replied, no, I don't mean that. Maid said, she was unable to eat, do you understand? Purple hair maid, seeing the scowl on Diane's face, she quickly apologized, not realizing the mistake she had made. Please forgive me, she said. As the two women faced each other in silence, Diane's gaze was enough to make the maid quiver in fear. Diane had already erupted in anger, berating the maid for her ignorance and lack of respect. The maid apologized and begged for forgiveness, but Diane remained stern, making it clear that she expected to be treated with proper respect as the owner of the palace. Diane glared at the maids for a moment, then spoke with a cold tone. The kneeling lady-in-waiting and held her chin, causing the maid to fill with fear. Does this look like a common aristocratic mansion? Do you think I'm a common person? Diane asked, her tone dripping with disdain. The maid didn't respond, too terrified to speak. Diane gently stroked the lady-in-waiting's hair and said, now, this is the imperial palace, right? Yes, lady, the maid responded. I am the owner of this palace. How dare you say, lady? Diane bellowed, violently pulling the maid's hair. The maid screamed in surprise and begged for forgiveness as Diane stared blankly at her. Diane brushed her hands off and stood up, causing the lady-in-waiting to collapse on the floor. There should be a division between upper and lower. I am the owner of this ivory palace. That's why you call me, Your Highness. Got it? Diane said sternly. Yes, Your Highness. Mistress, this place is full of only slow-witted people like her. It's troublesome. Yes, exactly, the slow-witted is you. Mistress, I shall lie down on the bed for a while. I feel faint since I haven't eaten at all these days. Another maid glanced at the mistress and replied, Your Highness, should I call a physician on standby? Mistress, all right, you may do that. Adele locked herself in her room and began to contemplate her situation. How many individuals can I trust? She couldn't trust anyone. Even the maids in the palace seemed untrustworthy. On the first day of her marriage, the ladies-in-waiting had not seemed surprised that the emperor had not shown up, as if they had already known he wouldn't be coming. Adele had no information on her new husband, Karl Ulrich Emont, as the two countries of Gottrov and Emont had not interacted with each other for a long time because the deep and turbulent sea separated the two countries. There was no reason to cross the ocean and target each other's territory, so the two nations did not go beyond recognizing each other's existence. Adele felt a heavy weight on her chest whenever she thought about the emperor, who was now officially her husband. Expect too much. Adele clenched her fists and ground her teeth in response to the thought. Adele's foreboding turned out to be accurate as limit to embarrassing anyone. Don't tell me on our wedding night, he brazenly went to his mistress. Scene shifts to Ivory Palace. Emperor came to Ivory Palace instead of Empress Palace. Emperor, is she asleep? Yes, Your Majesty. Karl entered Diane's bedroom with a frown, finding her lying on the bed, pale and sweating. His own eyes were sunken as if he had been through a lot of stress. He inhaled deeply as he heard a faint voice calling out to him. Karl, son. He saw a massive bed with blonde hair on the pillows and a pale complexion. Diane looked as though she was about to break out in a cold sweat, her hands drenched with sweat. Your Majesty? Diane's faint voice brought Karl back to reality. That he was still wearing the same wedding dress made Diane purse her lips, as though she was stopping herself from smiling. She assumed that since he saw her collapse, the wedding must have been a complete disaster. Are you okay? Karl asked. Diane nodded slowly and spoke to Karl in a condescending tone. Did you arrive immediately after the wedding? Then, what shall we do, Your Majesty? Stop. I'm very sorry. It always irritates me. Diane hardly rose from her bed. You should go, the Empress will be waiting for you. I said I wouldn't go. Diane pursed her lips and sobbed at these words. I chose the wedding dress of the Empress, Your Majesty. I also selected the ceremonial crown for Her Majesty, she said, unaware that Adele had changed to a gold crown. As I selected all of the ceremony necessities and flowers, it felt as though my heart was being torn apart. Diane stood in front of the Emperor, tears streaming down her face as she tried to stifle the tumultuous emotions roiling inside her. As she cried, the Emperor watched her, his expression one of concern but not agitation. After a long period of sobbing, Diane's tears finally began to subside. She stood there, staring at the Emperor's face, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The few remaining tears evaporated without a trace. Nothing will differ from the past. May I remain by the side, Your Majesty? Diane asked, begging sincerely while holding his sleeve with a pitiful. Yes. But whom should I present to Her Majesty? Because she is the Empress, nobles will refer to me as her concubine. It seems that Diane is concerned about her status in the palace and how she will be perceived by others, particularly the Empress and the nobles. A ripple appeared on the Emperor's previously calm face as he tilted his head and inquired, Do you have a title in mind? Lover, Diane responded, her heart racing wildly. She was short of breath and even began to perspire. Please inform the Empress that I am your lover. The Emperor stared at Diane for a long time with a confused expression, as if he did not know what she was thinking. And after some time, he responded with an odd tone, I understand. When Diane's request was granted, she appeared astounded. A wolf cannot be tamed, but it can be provoked by touching its weak spot. Emperor Karl was a wolf-like man who concealed a raging fire. And Diane was aware of his vulnerabilities. She extended her hand to the Emperor and he grasped it. She reclined on her bed and shifted slightly to one side. "Please embrace me," Diane said with a longing expression. Karl hesitated for a moment before finally yielding to Diane's silent request. And climbed onto the bed, pulling Diane into his arms. A smile played across her lips as she finally achieved her goal of spending the night with the Emperor. "If I cannot become the Empress, no one else can assume that role in its entirety." Every scene of both of these foolish is trying not to cringe challenge. The day after the wedding of the imperial couple, rumors spread like wildfire in a dry bush. Oh! As soon as the ceremony concluded, His Majesty departed for the Ivory Palace. So the Empress' wedding day was complicated? Yes. His Majesty arrived late to the wedding, correct? This is the first time this has ever occurred. How is Her Majesty doing? Yesterday, she announced that she would not receive any visitors. However, that did not save face. Can she assume authority over the imperial palace? As the noble ladies chattered in small groups, one of them suddenly grabbed the arm of the one who was gossiping. "Shish!" the other woman hissed, looking around nervously and shaking her head slightly. The group fell silent, all of them looking around in surprise. One of the women bit her lower lip in shock as she saw the Empress strolling leisurely through the adjacent corridor. The noble ladies quickly greeted the Empress with polite bows and curtsies, and Adele received their greetings with grace before continuing on her way. The ladies watched her retreating back with trembling hands held tightly to their chests. "Did she listen?" one of the noble ladies asked, looking back at the Empress' retreating figure with a worried expression. The other women narrowed their eyes and tried to gauge the Empress' reaction to their conversation. However, all they could focus on were her golden eyes that seemed to capture their attention immediately. She did not express displeasure. Therefore, she must not have heard, one of the women concluded after a moment of hesitation. Adele returned to the Empress Palace, her body feeling the strain of yesterday's ominous forecast. Despite the chill in the wind and the sun's heat, she maintained a composed facade, only allowing herself to take deep breaths in the privacy of her empty room. Standing alone for a long time, Adele's face contorted as she buried her hands in her face, overwhelmed by the disparity between her expectations and the reality of the situation despite being well prepared for this journey. Nobody from each month's native country was brought here for any reason other than the Emperor's request, and Adele knew that all of these factors were significant to Gotrov. They had no reason to embark on this journey of exile, but Adele couldn't let herself be consumed by the past. "You are intelligent, so as long as you are prudent, you will be fine." These were her mother's final words. Adele grinned self-deprecatingly as she remembered the voice. In the wedding traditions of each month, there is also a banquet. Due to the tradition of maintaining silence on the wedding day and the following day, a large banquet was held on the afternoon of the third day. On this day, the Emperor and his wife held their wedding banquet, and the entire palace was filled with revelry. Diane Poitiers had been working on the banquet since early morning, as it was an extension of the wedding. As she surveyed the exquisitely decorated main hall, "Your Highness, is there an alternative solution?" a lady's maid asked Diane politely. "No," Diane replied, shaking her head. The ladies in waiting exchanged sharp glances and briefly distanced themselves from Diane. Diane focused on the Empress chair, a luxurious red carpet seat where one could sit alongside the Emperor and look down on everyone. Diane had worked hard to rise from the rank of Countess's daughter to the position of the Emperor's favorite. She had lost her parents to the witch beasts that poured out of the tower, but she had persevered and earned the Emperor's love and even the Ivory Palace. This was the domain of the Emperor, and everything in it was imperial property. Only one person could sit beside the Emperor as his equal, his wife, the Empress. But a person who was born a princess and automatically assumed her position should not be placed above her. Today, the empress shall not be able to sit comfortably in that chair. Weddings, first nights, and inaugural banquets, none of the main characters shall be the empress. Should never be above me. The empress will never be able to sit on that chair today. Damn, I bet. Even Sigmund Freud can't cure this women's delusion. While cushioning the flower, the mistress thought, the wedding ceremony, the first night, the first banquet, the main character of those events is her, not the empress. That place, Emperor Sides, was meant for her from the start. All right, take it off, Adelaide commanded the maids. As the dress was removed, one of the maids spoke up. I sincerely apologize, Your Majesty. Adelaide leaned back in her chair and swept her hair up. Repair it in accordance with my measurements. I'll be waiting. The maids hesitated, but by the time the banquet arrives, it makes no difference if I arrive late. Get it repaired, Adelaide replied firmly. The maids looked at each other, unsure if they could carry out her commands. I sincerely apologize, Your Majesty. Small repairs on large clothes are simple, but large repairs on small clothes are difficult. The start of the banquet will not be a problem, but it will undoubtedly be later than the end time, one of the maids explained. Mother's words echoed in her mind as she grappled with the conundrum before her. Adele, do you believe your battles in the palace are insignificant? You are a general who has never stopped fighting. Don't let yourself go in Emont. For a moment, she remained silent. The dress before her, though beautiful, was not suitable for her wedding reception. It was not possible to dress in the Gotrov style for such an occasion. Well, that leaves me with only two options, Adele said as the maids waited attentively for her next command. I will not attend my wedding banquet, or I will not force myself to wear this ill-fitting dress. Is that understood? The maids lowered their heads, unable to respond to Adele's cold words. She straightened her back. Diane Poitiers plan my wedding? The maids hesitated before nodding in affirmation. The emperor granted permission, one of them offered. Adele could not help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The maids looked embarrassed and afraid, but Adele paid them no mind. All she could focus on was the absurdity of it all. Bring me the wedding gown and gold crown I wore, Adele commanded. I don't mind, Adele said firmly. Adele's thoughts were clear. She would not be blamed for her desire to gain advantage through a dress over an emperor's love. How would you like to know the Witch of Gotrov? Adele muttered, her eyes dark and menacing. The Ichmont Palace was alive with activity as the grand banquet in honor of the emperor's marriage began in the evening. Meanwhile, Diane and the Duke greeted guests throughout the banquet hall. Diane flattered. The Duke assisted greatly in decorating this banquet hall. It would not have been possible without our princess's eyes. Ha! Ha! The Duke laughed, praising Diane as a princess, and the other nobles laughed along. Whoa! My goodness! Isn't this a new atelier piece? One of the ladies exclaimed as she pointed to Diane's necklace with a surprised expression. The other ladies rushed to praise her jewelry. Oh, my God! I've heard these new products are stunning. I went to see them, but I was disappointed to learn that the princess had bought everything, one of them said. Oh my, these earrings are also part of a set, another added. The noblewomen all praised Diane, admiring the subtlety of her jewelry choices. But one of them couldn't help but ask with curiosity, oh, and I heard Your Majesty was still at the Ivory Palace on the first night of his marriage. Another chimed in, saying, I also heard it. That's one of a kind of love, princess. I envy you. Diane feigned a pitiful voice and said, please don't say anything like that. I'm afraid Her Majesty might misinterpret. The noblewomen continued to praise and chat with Lady Diane, not because they wanted to know her better, but to curry her favor. My lord, our estate's yield is not the same as in previous years. Would it be possible to consider a tax cut? A tower has recently collapsed near our estate, princess. Could you perhaps show leniency towards the strikers? Orphaned ladies had been sweating profusely in front of Diane since birth, offering compliments, making eye contact, laughing and inquiring. Diane smiled softly and nodded her head gently. "I'll make certain to inform your majesty," she said. "Thank you, my lord. Our princess is so modest. The emperor still delegated his authority over the palace administration to you." "Well, isn't this more than the queen's authority? You make risky remarks on the spur of the moment," a low voice interrupted Lennox's speech. Lennox turned his head. Standing before them was a handsome man with a cold expression. Lionel, a representative of the Duke of Valdre, had come to the banquet on behalf of Theseus, who couldn't attend due to work. Took a step back, looking at Lionel's face. Lennox, however, seemed undeterred by Lionel's intimidating presence. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest and making a sour face. Diane frowned, aware of the danger of engaging in a confrontation with Lionel Valdre in such a setting. She tried to stop her brother, but Lennox's mouth was faster than his brain and he seemed determined to stand his ground. The Duke of Despoin, meanwhile, turned his head with a small, dry cough, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between Lennox and Lionel. "Did I say something I wasn't supposed to say?" he scoffed. "Perhaps you have forgotten why this banquet was held," Lionel replied. Lennox's eyes bore into Lionel's back as he strode past, his mind reeling with anger. Diane's attempts to calm him went unnoticed as he inhaled deeply, preparing to confront Lionel. As their attention shifted back to the entrance, suddenly, a servant shouted out in excitement, "Her Majesty, she has arrived." All eyes turned towards the entrance, where the Empress stood, her commanding presence immediately drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. The guests stood up to bow and curtsy as she entered, and the banquet hall was filled with a new energy as everyone eagerly awaited her arrival. The Empress was petite and slender, but her presence commanded the attention of the room. The nobles who saw Adele Ulrich Aimant were struck by her intensity, her golden eyes sparkling like stars in the night sky, and her pale face glowing like moonlight, and even Lionel couldn't take his eyes off her as she passed by. Everyone held their breath as Adele, holding everyone's hearts in her hand, softly smiled and spoke. "I apologize for running a little late." Diane took a deep breath as the Empress ascended the Emperor's stairs, a forbidden path for anyone else, with a regal grace that seemed almost effortless. The nobles around her held their breath, their eyes fixed on the Empress as she made her way to the throne. As the Empress scanned the crowd with her piercing golden eyes, her every move calculated and deliberate, the banquet hall was filled with a sense of unease. The guests seemed to shrink under her gaze, their words caught in their throats as they struggled to maintain their composure. The Empress's power and authority were undeniable as she surveyed her subjects like a queen surveying her kingdom. "How are you, Lord Despoin? Are you enjoying your meal?" The Empress's voice cut through the tension as she turned her gaze to Lord Despoin, who sat next to Diane Poitiers. "Your Majesty, what brings you here?" "Nonetheless, I was expecting you," Lord Despoin replied, trying to hide his unease. As the crowd began to stir, a familiar face emerged from the throng. Lionel, a vassal noble of the Balder family, stepped forward to greet the Empress. He looked up at her, his eyes scanning her form as she exchanged greetings with the other nobles. Diane watched with a blank stare as the nobles scrambled to greet the Empress. People who had been chatting and seeking friendship quickly changed to people who wanted to greet the Empress, creating a rare scene. But Adele's gaze passed over Diane, as if she was unremarkable, just like the attendants and maids who passed by. Diane felt a sense of contempt rise within her, as if the Empress had no interest in her. Clenching her fists, Diane ignored the long line of nobles and went straight to the podium. She didn't care about protocol, she just wanted the Empress to notice her. "Fine. If you don't want to see me properly, I'll make you," she muttered under her breath. unfold with a hint of amusement on her face as Diane approached her. The noble's eyes shone with interest as the two women faced each other across the grand staircase. "Look at how favored she is by His Majesty," one noblewoman said. "I wonder how the Empress will react to this," a man said, his voice tinged with curiosity. Mistress cuts the line of nobles who wants to greet Empress. "Good day, Her Majesty the Empress. My name is Diane Poitiers." Mistress introduced herself with a respectful bow. Adele smiled sweetly. "Mistress, I worked on the wedding and this banquet. Do you like it?" Her question was bold, but she couldn't help but want to know how the Empress felt about having the Emperor's mistress at the banquet. "You've been through a lot. I apologize for not being able to wear the banquet gown you had prepared. I wanted to wear it since it was lovely, but it was too small. I just couldn't put it on." The nobles started whispering that I look at it. "She is wearing her wedding dress. I didn't notice it since it doesn't stand out. Wait, the dress prepared by Lady Poitiers was too small. Don't tell me she intentionally." Suddenly, there was a commotion at the entrance of the hall. "His Majesty has arrived." The Emperor, who had not shown his face until now, stood there with a stern expression, his presence commanding the attention of all in the room. The Empress was seated on the throne, her demeanor calm and collected, giving off the impression that she naturally held power and control, and would not be swayed by the slightest disturbance. Meanwhile, Diane's entire body relaxed as she saw Karl. He was her only hope, her only source of light. Tears formed in her eyes unintentionally. The Emperor frowned as he stopped in front of her and her gentle eyes filled with tears. He then looked back and forth between the Empress and Diane, his expression unreadable, but Adele knew what he was thinking. "Are you crying?" The Emperor's voice was low and deep, a hint of concern in his tone as he blocked Diane's path, shielding her from the Empress's gaze. "What are you doing?" the Emperor asked, his tone sharp. "That's what I'd like to know," Adele replied, trying to compose herself. "I was just trying to greet her." "What kind of greeting made you cry this way?" Karl asked, frowning at Diane's tears. "I'm curious as to why she's crying as well." She approached me and smiled. "Ask the young lady if you're curious about why she wanted to say hi," Adele replied, her voice becoming sharper. Karl turned to face Diane after hearing Adele's comments. Her face was marred by tears and fear. "I just wanted to greet Her Majesty the Empress," Diane said, trying to explain her actions, her voice trembling. Then turned his gaze to the Empress. Adele felt like she could strangle the man with her eyes. The two locked eyes in a heated exchange as the nobility watched on. "Forget it," he said, his gaze fixed on Diane, who was sadly watching from a corner of the hall. "That lady is my lover. Remember that." The Empress responded with a cold expression, her words sharp and biting. "Since you lack warmth, I will not pay attention to your lover either. Understand?" Adele smirked, finding a twisted sense of pleasure in the situation. "I met her twice, but both times she was the one who approached me." As the Emperor turned away without a word, Adele couldn't help but feel a sense of victory wash over her. She smiled brightly at the nobles, relishing in their attention and the Emperor's discomfort. As she chuckled, a small stir ran through the nobility. "She seems to be keeping her cool," one whispered. Lionel nodded slowly, but his mind was elsewhere. It seemed that rather than maintaining her composure, the Empress was trying hard not to lose. He couldn't help but notice that the smile on the Empress's face seemed forced, of someone in power, rather than the carefree smile on her lips when she rode a horse. Adele stormed into her palace, dismissing all of her attendants. She took deep breaths, trying to calm the anger and frustration that filled her chest. The Empress's black hair seemed to dance in the air, frustration that filled her chest, but it was no use. Her eyes shone with determination and her hands clenched tightly in response to the tingling in her peripheral nerves. The Empress's black hair seemed to dance in the air as the room was filled with a shifting of air currents, causing the candles to flicker and the windows to shake. She poured herself a glass of golden liquor and downed it in one swift gulp, feeling the burn in her throat as the alcohol hit her bloodstream. Well, I get why Diana Poitiers behaved that way. However, what's the deal with Karl Ulrich? If he loves her so much that he can't live without her, he should have just proclaimed her as the Empress. Why did he act like that after dragging innocent people into this? Do they think they are star-crossed? You'll appoint Diane Poitiers as Empress when I die. Is this some kind of tragic romance or a fantasy? Also, what? He acknowledge my lover too? She recalled her father's words. You should always act like you have it all. Don't act humble even when you have nothing at all. When you really have nothing, people never fail to find out. An empress acknowledged by has nothing but her title. The moment this fact is brought to light, everyone will rush to rip me apart, right? Think of a way. Adelaide, you have to think of a way. She queried her ladies-in-waiting about the inner workings of the palace and was not surprised to learn that Diane Poitiers, the emperor's favorite, was currently serving as the acting temporary manager. Who was the previous general manager? Adele asked. Countess Hannah Giggs, came the swift response. She instructed her ladies-in-waiting to call Countess Giggs and request a meeting with her. The servants looked at her with apprehension, knowing that Diane Poitiers was responsible for dismissing Hannah Giggs from her position. But Adele was not deterred, her determination and urgency clear in her tone. Bring the Imperial Palace law book up to date, she ordered. The current emperor decided to give all the palace's management authorities to Diana Poitiers instead of the Empress. It's fortunate that at least the Empress' inherent power is bestowed upon appointment. Maid, Your Majesty, you have a visitor waiting for you. It's my first time seeing you since the wedding, Your Majesty. When the guest welcomed her with a unique tone, Adele smiled back. Elizabeth Ulrich Grand was an unexpected visitor. Please take a seat, Adele said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Yes, Your Majesty. As the two women sat facing each other, the ladies-in-waiting offered them refreshments. Could you give us a moment of privacy? Adele asked the ladies-in-waiting. Of course, Your Majesty, they replied, bowing and leaving the room. Elizabeth watched the steam rise from the hot teacup and then focused on Adele's shining golden eyes. She looks smaller than I thought, however, despite that, I didn't think of her as weak. Not once. She's the kind of person who makes her opponent feel pressured just by her existence. Is there something on my face? Adele asked. I apologize, Your Majesty. I was simply mesmerized by the beauty of your eyes. Please forgive my staring, Elizabeth replied, feeling embarrassed for staring too long. I'm very fond of you, Your Majesty. I heard that you called Countess Hannah Giggs to the palace. She used to be my nursemaid. Adele asked, ask why you're telling me this. Calling her to the palace means, you want to strengthen your position in the palace, right? Isn't that natural of an empress? Adele replied, you're right. Duchess inform Adele, it is. That being said, it surely won't be easy to do, since Diana Poitiers has the emperor's affection on her, and the power of Duke d'Avenel, the emperor's uncle, behind her. Everyone in the palace right now is on their side. Adele asked, let me just ask this question. What benefits do you offer me for solidifying my position in the imperial palace, as empress? She just went straight to the point. Then I won't need to talk in circles. The emperor is caught between the two of them and is not following the correct path. That's why I hope the empress will cut the connection between Diane Poitiers and Duc d'Espoin. That's why I desperately hope for Your Majesty to sever the link between them and the emperor. Adele, by solidifying my position as empress in the imperial palace? That's correct. Bringing in Countess Hannah Giggs would certainly be beneficial. I think it would be sufficient to keep her by his side and seek her guidance. And if I may give you a suggestion, please release a notice to look for an aide. Adele gets confused. An aide? The Imperial Palace General Manager is responsible for managing the internal affairs of the royal palace. It is mostly women. Duchess said. The Empress's assistants, on the other hand, are mostly men. When my father, the former emperor, changed his mistress, my mother-in-law proudly increased the number of assistants. Adele burst out laughing. So, if the emperor has a concubine, I should have assistants, right? I wasn't saying that you should have a revenge appear. A fighting spirit is essential in each mont. If you do nothing after being humiliated in front of everyone, they'll think that the Empress is no better than the mistress. So you should never lose your fighting spirit. And, although it is unlikely, if Balder's family sends a candidate, I recommend selecting him without hesitation. Prince Balder? The Grand Duchess nodded slowly in response to Adele's question. If you need any help from me, please don't hesitate to contact me. We can easily reach you through Countess Hannah Giggs, Your Majesty. Hannah Giggs had long been a powerful figure in the imperial court, having gained her position as the Grand Duchess's nanny and godmother due to her connection with the previous empress. But her life was turned upside down when an unexpected character appeared, Diane Poitiers. Mrs. Giggs, like a lily in a vase, was stunned the moment she saw Diane. She was the opposite of the former empress, who was the cause of the illness that killed her. Diane Poitiers had an atmosphere that was eerily similar to Karl Ulrich's birth mother. The emperor quickly fell in love with her and one day withdrew all authority from Mrs. Giggs. Diane Poitiers played the role of the emperor. Diane's first command was to expel Mrs. Giggs from the palace. The Duke of Grand personally disputed this decision, but Emperor Charles did not overturn Diane's decree, revealing his intentions. Hannah Giggs was forced to leave the palace in this manner, without even a retirement ceremony. The cry of the newly crowned empress made the old lady, who had resigned in disgrace, feel like her heart was going to burst. Please come in. Thank you for granting my request. I am delighted, Your Majesty. Mrs. Giggs was respectful to the Empress. Keep your head held high. I apologize, Your Majesty. It's been a long time since I've been here, so I'm moved. It must be the same as the former Empress used it, right? Mrs. Giggs asked, delicately sweeping the sofa. I chose this sofa as well. However, because they are quite old goods, Your Majesty, it seems that it is time to replace them. Adele replied, I want to entrust you to do those jobs, is it possible? Hannah said, as for me, I'd be grateful to do it. However, His Majesty won't take it favorably. Adele in playful manner. So, you're fine with it, right? As I said, it'd be my joy, Your Majesty. The maid who was waiting outside gently knocked on the door and entered to inform the Empress of something. Your Majesty, the dress I ordered recently has just arrived. What's the matter? That is, there. Don't be difficult, just say it clearly. The lady-in-waiting took a deep breath, as if determined, and then stated, the Imperial Palace Finance Office said they couldn't pay for Your Majesty's garment. The Empress was angry and asked, what? She was so enraged that she thought a nut might jump out of her throat. The Empress closed her eyes and remained quiet for a moment. Mrs. Giggs suggested that the Empress should handle the unpaid bill by paying it personally through the Empress Palace. She explained that if rumors of the unpaid bill were to spread, it could harm the Empress's reputation, and so it would be best to summon the person responsible to the palace to pay them and give them extra money in exchange for their silence. However, you won't need to meet them directly, Your Majesty. Please entrust the task to me. Adele sent her maid to go and call the dealers. Maid. Yes, Your Highness. Adele quickly went to her room and retrieved her emergency money when the lady-in-waiting rushed out of the drawing room in a panic. Adele took out a gold bar and placed it in her silk pouch, her fingers turning white from the weight of the purse. She muttered to herself, let's give it a try, her eyes brighter than gleaming gold. Mrs. Giggs examined the gold bar presented by the Empress. I'll see what the dress is like and pay for it, but is it okay if I use up these gold bars without leaving a balance? She inquired, wanting to give the impression that the Empress was generous. I brought it specifically for and use it, the Empress replied calmly, sipping on some cold water to soothe her stomach. How is this possible? Adele asked. I don't believe there is any budget for the Empress Palace. Is there no budget for the Empress Palace? At the end of the year, the Emont Imperial Palace prepares the budget for the following year, but since Her Majesty was not present the previous year, the budget was most likely not prepared, Mrs. Giggs explained. So you're saying this is normal? Of course not, Mrs. Giggs replied. Through the emergency supplementary budget system, it is possible to reorganize the budget as much as possible. The issue is that only His Majesty the Emperor has authority over supplementary budgets. Just as the conversation was about to continue, a maid announced the arrival of the owner of the dress shop. Adele and Mrs. Giggs both stood up to greet the new arrival. The Empress gave Mrs. Giggs a friendly pat on the shoulder and smiled, take good care of it. Don't worry. But where are you going, Your Majesty? The Empress laughed sarcastically and said, there is no way to lose if you know your enemy and yourself. It was a smile that made even the elderly lady, who had survived everything from prenatal battles to air battles, feel cold. Don't be concerned. I'll see you later, the Empress said before adding, allow them to stay in my palace today. She then strode away with a smile on her lips. Adele arrived at the Imperial Palace, which housed the Emperor's bedroom and the general meeting room for managing state affairs. The palace was a neat and practical space compared to the magnificent Empress Palace. As Adele walked through the palace, she saw people gathered in groups of 3 and 5, dressed in various uniforms, as if a meeting of the ministers was taking place. When the Empress unexpectedly appeared, they quickly corrected their posture and respectfully bowed their heads as Adele passed through the crowd. Does it appear that there is a meeting? Adele asked the gatekeeper as they walked through the front door. Yes, the gatekeeper politely replied. As soon as the attendants learned of the Empress's visit, they rushed out to greet her. Adele explained the reason for her visit. I'd like to meet with His Majesty the Emperor, she said. Her Majesty the Empress, yes, the attendant replied. If you wait in the drawing room for a while, I will inquire of Your Majesty and respond. Drawing area? The Empress asked. Yes, the attendant replied. The Empress nodded, then narrowed her eyes and tilted her head as if she were thinking about something. Doesn't the Central News Conference have a waiting room? Of course, there is a waiting room, but it isn't as comfortable as the drawing room, to which we will direct you. It doesn't matter, the Empress said. I'd also like to see the meeting place of high officials in Emont, so please point me in the right direction. The Empress ordered in a firm tone as if she didn't want any objections, so the attendants had no choice but to obey her. The Emperor sat in the seat of honor with a bored expression. Suddenly, a man's scream interrupted his thoughts. Oh, Your Majesty! The man cried out. Please send strikers and keepers our way. Everyone is perishing. They are currently dying. Duke d'Espoin was annoyed by the man's cries and whines, like a child. No matter how hard you try, it keeps coming out. Even the flying monster is appearing now, and there is no way to stop it. Unless the striker and keeper take down the tower. Well, do you know where we're going? Lennox Poitiers, who sat to the right of the Duke of d'Espoin, broke the weeping appeal. Even those who have first and second level towers built on their territory don't say anything right now, right? In any case, what has been constructed in Calvin County is only a 4th grade tower. Didn't you say it's gotten bigger in diameter? It's not even level 4. How can you refuse when the document specifies level 4? Count Calvin swallowed his rage, jumped up from his seat, and kneeled before the Emperor. Honorable His Majesty the Emperor. Please help me. Your Majesty. Lennox Poitiers. Barge on Count. Seriously, would the Lord of the Lord come here and ask for assistance? You are self-centered. Bag Poitiers, please stop arguing. Lennox was warned by Duke Balder. Despite being a commoner, he was clearly a striker of exceptional skill, having attained the position of the inheritable count. He did not, however, dare to compete with Duke Balder. Nonetheless, he was arrogant and trusted the Duke of Devonshire and Diane Poitiers. An attendant approached the Emperor. Your Majesty, he said. Her Majesty the Empress is expecting you. Empress? The high-ranking officials who were about to leave paused and looked at the Emperor and his entourage. Yes. She is now waiting for the meeting to end in the conference hall's waiting room. Where do you want to go? Karl, who frowned at those words, sat in his chair and placed his order. Bring her here when the lieutenants leave. That's fine. Meanwhile, in the middle of the senior officials' meeting, the Empress stood up in her waiting room outside the meeting room, her ears perking up. She appeared to be paying attention to what was being said, pausing her movements and concentrating on the voices. Lennox immediately objected to this. Several nobles who had been sitting quietly until now jumped up and shouted. Count Calvin said. What is the point of having a group of magicians? What the hell is the point of staying at the Imperial Palace and not going to places where you really need to go? Lennox Poitiers, barge on Count. What if a Class 1 tower fell in the Imperial Palace while we were on our way to destroy a Class 4 tower? Fight was about to erupt again. The Emperor pounded the table, tired of the meeting itself. Stop. There will be no conclusion. We'll never finish at this rate. Count Calvin, I feel bad for your fief. However, sending magicians your way is deemed unnecessary. Your Majesty, please reconsider it. Emperor, declare the meeting is over now. Seriously, how trashy the Emperor is. Instead of listening to the pleading of his people, he is agreeing with an arrogant brat. Scene shifts, outside of the conference hall. The Duke of Despoin, standing at the front of the crowd, called out to the Empress with a pleasant laugh. My niece-in-law, it's nice to see you here. Everyone in the room looked at the Empress, wondering how she would react to the Duke's disrespectful and inappropriate greeting. However, instead of responding to the Duke's greeting, Adele stared at him calmly and collectedly. Her features were so cold and detached that she seemed almost robotic. The room fell into a tense silence, the atmosphere thick with unease. It was as if the stillness of the sea at night had descended upon the room, bringing with it a sense of unease and foreboding. The Empress's silence only added to the importance of anxiety, causing the air in the room to feel heavy and oppressive. The coldness of thin ice. Adele's gaze was fixed on the Duke, her red lips, pale skin, black hair cascading down her shoulders, and piercing golden eyes all contributed to the eerie atmosphere that seemed to emanate from her very being. The nobles found themselves uncomfortable and uneasy, their skin crawling at the strange aura the Empress exuded. Duke, thought I knew you aren't an easy one. He spoke. I am sorry if I offend you. As the elder of the Ulrich royal family, I just wanted to come off as friendly. Finally, in a polite way, the Empress replied, It seems you chose the wrong way, to be perceived as friendly. I hope you would be more careful in future. Duke's response, I will keep this in mind. The Valgier brothers entered, their eyes widening at the sight. Empress Adele and Lionel Valgier's eyes directly, in the dim light of the room, and Lionel found himself unable to look away. Adele gave him a small, almost invisible smile. Greetings, Your Majesty. Oh, Sir Lionel Valgier, it's nice to meet you here. You have good timing. Could you tell me who Count Calvin is? Count Calvin hurried and greeted the Empress, greeting Your Majesty. Empress saw his dull face. She instantly recognized the man. Oh, you are Count Calvin. Her voice cutting through the silence. Did you say that flying monsters would appear? Count Calvin, taken aback by the unexpected question, nodded quickly. Yes, Your Majesty. Adele raised an eyebrow. Is there not a wizard assigned to each region? Lennox Poitiers, standing beside Calvin, answered the question. Wizards are managed by capital, Your Majesty. We are responsible for protecting the entire kingdom. Lennox greets the Empress. My name is Lennox Poitiers. I am the vice captain of the magic department. Empress asks from Lennox, Does not each mont classify towers with aerial monsters as intermediate? From what I heard, no magicians are been sent. Lennox replied, it's a bit worrisome situation, but you didn't need to concern about it. I am doing my best to protect the royal palace so that no monster or tower may come near us. He thought it looks like she wanted to show that she is knowledgeable about the tower, but in reality, she knew nothing. Foolish Empress. Well, mister, it's you who is foolish and judging our heroine. Adele turned to Lennox. She thought he is looking down on me. I see, Empress replied. Of course, Your Majesty. We will do everything in our power to protect the kingdom. The Empress gave a faint smile, then walked past Lennox with a cold expression. I see. Thank you for your explanation. Adele nodded, then turned to the attendant waiting at the door. I am ready now. Please lead me to His Majesty the Emperor. The attendant nodded and opened the door. Your Majesty, you may come in. He stood aside to allow Adele to pass. You heard him. It was nice to meet all of you, she said. Then she went for the conference hall. All nobles kept staring her. Lionel thought she had maintained her poise and dignity, using her silence, her stern gaze, and her refined yet cold demeanor to assert her authority. It was a presence that belonged to someone born to rule. As they walked away, Lionel couldn't help but glance back at the door through which Adele had disappeared, wondering what the future held for the powerful and commanding Empress. She didn't change. Our handsome hero's standard is Empress. Well, viewers, we can't complain since our Empress is so majestic. Our beautiful heroine Adele enters the room. The Emperor's cold gaze was fixed on Adele as she entered the meeting room. She didn't offer a greeting. As soon as the door closed, the Emperor asked impatiently, So, what do you want to say? Adele was unfazed by his demeanor, meeting his gaze with her steady eyes. Why did you request a national marriage? Emperor replies, What do you mean? Why did you make me Empress in the first place? I am sure it was you who asked for a national marriage. The Emperor was silent for a moment, considering his words. Finally, he looked up at Adele and spoke softly, his eyes as dark as a mountain valley. It just exists. Like a feather on this quill, it just exists. The quill's sole existence is for decoration only. Just by being there, you fulfill your purpose. Well, yeah, you are also just fulfilling the role of a jerk just by simply existing. She seemed to freeze her air currents, which had only been cold. Keep the pride of Adelaide, who had once been the crown princess of Gotrov, was crumpled. Her crumpled pride shattered like shredded paper, not even the nib or stem of the pen. He saw her as a useless part feather of the quill. She replies to the Emperor, I should only fulfill my role as Empress. Is that what you want? Then why did you have to hurt my prestige? I never did that, Emperor replied. Adele laughed at the firm answer. It seemed pointless even to enumerate her humiliations at her wedding and banquet. So Adele drove him away with her sharper words. Did you do it because you were afraid that I might harm Diane Poitiers? Even the Emperor, who had objected so far, was silent about the question. After all, that was the reason. I want that too. I will fulfill my responsibilities as Empress Aimante, and carry out my duty as Empress. Your Majesty, please cooperate so that I can fulfill my responsibilities. Emperor asked, what kind of cooperation are you talking about? First of all, I need to learn about Empire. I need someone to consult to understand this place. The best way to do this is to ask the person who is in charge of the palace. And I'm afraid it's Diane Poitiers. It would be difficult for me to call her advice. Emperor Karl had nothing to say. So I would like to consult with Countess Hannah Giggs, who was the previous general manager. It will soon be known that Mrs. Giggs entered the palace, so Adele took the lead in advance. Hannah Gigg, Emperor replied in a cold tone. I'm asking for your understanding because Your Majesty sent her out of the palace. However, we will not have her as the general manager. Karl, who had been agonizing for a while, nodded and agreed because there was no justification to refuse. Thank you, and one more thing, the Empress Palace doesn't have a budget. I ask for an urgent supplementary budget. Adele asked the Emperor in a businesslike tone. This time the Emperor was speechless. A budget for the Empress Palace, the Emperor nodded, understanding the Empress' request. Adele turns and walked out of the room. The Emperor watched her leave, a small smile on his face. He knew the Empress was strong, capable, and confident she would handle the challenges ahead. As the door closed behind the Empress, Emperor Karl exhaled a long breath and rubbed his forehead with his hand. He could still see the image of the Empress, dressed in the red gown that symbolized her status, fluttering in front of him like an illusion. "Whoa," he muttered to himself, trying to calm his racing heart. Even after becoming the Emperor, the afterimages of his past continued to haunt him. He remembered the fluttering hem of a red dress and the tiny hands of a child trying to grab onto it but never quite reaching the hem. "My poor son," his birth mother had said to him. "The Empress will never acknowledge you." And she had been right. Karl had wanted to be recognized by the perfect-looking woman who loved to wear red, but she had never acknowledged him. When calmed down, he thought the Empress Palace budget hasn't been revised. With a deep sigh, Karl gave an order to the attendants who had entered the meeting room. "Call Diane," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Yes, Your Majesty." A while later, Diane entered the meeting room and called the Emperor with a warm and fresh voice, like a spring breeze. "Your Majesty, why did you call me?" The Emperor, Karl, who had been deep in thought with narrowed eyebrows, raised his head at the sound of the voice. "Did you bring the imperial budget?" The Emperor asked for it right away. She replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." Karl picked up the budget bill that Diane had brought and quickly glanced over it. As Adele had said, the Empress Palace had yet to be budgeted. Why wasn't there an emergency supplementary budget for the Empress Palace budget? This should have also been included in the preparations for the Empress. Diane's eyes widened in surprise at the Emperor's low questioning. "Oh my God, didn't I? What should I do, Your Majesty? Oh God, I'm sorry. I thought I had done it but I forgot." In an instant, both eyes were stained red, and she was confused, not knowing what to do. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I was immature. The Empress must be displeased." "How can I fix this, Your Majesty?" "Stop it, you only need to revise it," the Emperor said. Tears suddenly fell from her eyes. Karl sighed and took out his handkerchief, and handed it to her. "Stop crying. You have too many tears, stop crying. You're such a crybaby." "Mistress, the Empress must have been displeased. What do I do, Your Majesty?" "Again. She reminds me of her. What should I do?" Karl stared blankly at the woman who lowered her shoulders, trembled, and wiped away her tears for a long time. It seemed like he was thinking about something again. It was his mother. "Tell me you have mommy issues without telling me you have mommy issues." "Your Majesty, is there anything you want to say?" The mistress had bad feelings about her summon. Suddenly, the Emperor spoke. "The Empress' original authority has already been transferred to the Empress Palace. In addition, I will take back the authority of the Palace Ministry that I entrusted to you. I will delegate it to the Empress later." Mistress shocked. Scene shifts. Both brothers are on their way in a carriage. Lionel's elder brother spoke. The Duke of Despoin was the one who dared to recommend the Princess of Gotthove across the sea as the Empress, just to make a scarecrow Empress. But it seems like he failed. Lionel. Yes, she is the person who can dominate people merely with her face. She was someone who knew how to control the atmosphere with just one hand. Seeing that, Theseus understood why the late Empress Dowager Gottrov would use her spirit and try to send his daughter across the sea. Since the newly crowned emperor was only 14 years old, Geisen's sister wouldn't have been able to help much in strengthening imperial authority. "Lionel, are you listening to me?" Looking out the window, recalling the Empress. No, from the first time they met the Empress at Emont, she had been stuck in his head. He vividly remembered the image of the Empress, smiling as she rode her horse, wild but carefree. My man is literally simping for her. In the Empress Palace. As Adele sat in the Empress Palace, sipping her lemon tea, Mrs. Giggs sat across from her, observing her closely. "Have you paid for the dress, Mrs. Giggs?" Empress asked. Mrs. Giggs noticed the luxurious red silk dress adorned with ornate gold threads that Adele was wearing. "No, It's not that. It's just that. Did you see the design of the dress that I ordered? Adele asked hesitantly. Yes, I did. But it seems that you are wearing a different dress. Did you choose this one instead? Mrs. Giggs inquired. Well, I didn't exactly choose it. The ladies-in-waiting choose, Adele admitted, frowning. Emont-style clothing is unfamiliar, and I didn't pay much attention to the design of the clothing even when I was in my home country. I will return the finished dress and order again. Please wear ready-made clothes for the time being. Is this design out of formality? Adele asked. At Adele's question, Mrs. Giggs shook her head. No, it is not a matter of formality. It is a design that looks very much like the late Her Majesty. Adele was surprised. She asked, but why? It's because the dress closely resembles Her Majesty's style. It's as if you've inherited the clothes of Her Majesty, the previous Empress. It was natural that Adele did not readily understand that. What do you mean? Yes, perhaps that was the issue. While the crowns of previous empresses were also inherited, Adele hadn't considered the design of the clothes to be of much importance. His Majesty the Emperor will be thrilled by a dress that reminds him of the late Empress. Don't wear it as much as possible. Her Majesty, there is no benefit in doing so. No benefit, Empress response. Yes. That's right. Her Majesty the former Empress and the present Emperor did not get along very well. Lady Kix was the late Empress' right hand and a person who was kicked out of the royal palace by the Emperor. It would be better to trust her words regarding this matter. All right, you may do that. I need more trustworthy people. Ah, I also need to meet with Count Calvin. Summon him to the Empress's palace. The scene shifts to Ivory Palace. Diane shut herself in her room. Tears poured down her face as she cried uncontrollably. Eventually, she clutched her stomach with both hands and cried out. She thought, how easy it is for Empress to rob her power like that. Empress must have done something to get back her authority. That woman was born a princess and she always had everything without any effort. It's not fair. She hit her chest hard and laughed through her tears, her face distorted and stained by her crying. She gets from her bed and, pulling the thick blackout curtains. She looked at the brightly lit room with determination, taking in the marble floor that shone like a pearl, the golden moldings, the ceiling embroidered with masterpieces, and the chandelier made with thousands of crystals woven together. This was the most beautiful, Ivory Palace and, it was said to be the most beautiful in Emont. It's where Emperor's biological mother always wanted to live. The palace was given by the Emperor to me. That woman won't defeat me. That woman who has nothing but her title, I will make her powerless, and then she will realize her place, she muttered. Scene shifts to the Empress Palace. Here's your queen, Mrs. Giggs announced Adele's arrival. Count Calvin quickly rose to his feet and turned to greet her. When was the tower descend? Adele asked, cutting straight to the point. The Count was taken aback by the question. Empress asked, first there was surely no flying demon, but over time, did it appear? Adele continued, is the diameter of the tower getting wider? You are right, Count replied. I ran when I saw the flying monster. No one had weapons to defend against the beasts, regardless of age or gender. From the elderly who've lost all their teeth to children just entering puberty, everyone is fighting for survival. When the Empress asked about the absence of strikers and keepers, the Count explained that they were normally dispatched based on tower level. Empress inquire, the tower is level 4 but still no support is sent. Count replied, many times even for level 2 towers, capital never send their support. Empress murdered, that's no different than telling the whole area to die. Please, Your Majesty, the Count begged, tears streaming down his face, people are dying. The weak and slow, including women and children, are being torn apart by the beasts. Even the trained knights of the territory have died from exhaustion. It's a living hell. Mrs. Kix, who was nearby, interrupted the Count. She gave the Count a warning not to use such unrefined words in front of Empress. Sorry, he apologized, but the Empress replied, no, You don't know that you expressed hell in a purified way. Her mind was consumed by a vivid memory of hell. She saw the bloody skies, the monstrous, the smoke, the screams of the people, the bodies scattered everywhere, and the pools of blood. Mothers wept for their lost children, and children shook the dead bodies of their parents, begging for them to wake up. The tower had appeared in the world suddenly one day, causing chaos and destruction. But, as humans always do, they found ways to adapt. Wizards, who could control the magic of the tower, emerged, and the roles of strikers and keepers, along with knights, became crucial in climbing to the top. Empress remember her mother's words. Her mother saw the crisis as an opportunity. Her mother said, "Does Adele you really think you can save the world? There is no need. All you have to close your eyes and cover your ears, for a while, and then I will give you the world." "Mother," Adele spoke up, breaking the silence, "you say such cruel things because you have not seen the misery of those who have died. You don't have to offer me the world." Her words marked the beginning of her strained relationship with her mother. Eventually, her mother took the crown from Adele. Coming back to reality, Adele looked at the Count, who stood before her with his white hair and wrinkled face, and his rough, bloodless lips. "Your Majesty, thank you for your concern," the Count said with a smile. "I apologize, but I must return to my territory as soon as possible, so I must go now." "Evacuate the inhabitants to nearby estates," the Empress said, her voice squeaky. The Empress stood up, her face showing genuine concern. The best hiding place to prevent flying spells is caves or underground spaces. Evacuate the elderly and weak there. If you take refuge far from the tower and join with various lords, it'll be more effective. You can endure longer and put pressure on the capital. Then the Empress paused and turned her head towards Mrs. Kick. Mrs. Kick gave Count some gold bars. "Take it." In a trembling voice, Count asks, "Why are you giving this to me?" Empress replied, "I am certain that with this, your citizens and others can survive for a little while." She apologizes to Count, 'cause she could not help him. "Why did the Empress summon Count Calvin?" Theseus asked, gazing out at the late summer landscape. Lionel, focusing on the documents before him, replied, curious about the situation. Surprisingly, the Emperor would abandon the Count of Calvin, Theseus mused. He's always been a loyal servant to the imperial family. I agree, Lionel said, looking up from his work. Until now, most of the lands abandoned by the Emperor belonged to families that disobeyed him. Never mind, Count Calvin's carriage is arriving, Theseus said. The Count appeared to be in distress, tears streaming down his face. Lionel grabs Count's shoulder and asks, "What's the wrong, Count? What happens in the Empress's palace?" The Count revealed a pouch from his bosom. "She gave me this. With this, she told me to ask to evacuate the residents in the nearby territories." Now the Count is about to leave the Duke's mansion. He apologizes for the inconvenience, leaving like this, because he wants to evacuate his people as soon as possible. Theseus gave Count a bag of gold bars too. "I'm sorry I couldn't be of direct help," Theseus said sympathetically to Count Calvin. The Count shook his head. "Don't say this, Duke. This old man feels ashamed." The sun began to set as the Count's carriage disappeared from view. "It was unforeseen from Her Majesty," Theseus said. Lionel thought about how the Empress helped Count by giving gold bars, then blushed a bit. Ah, so cute of him. Now in the Empress Palace, our heroine is sad. "There was nothing I could do except give him gold bars." "You did the best within your authority," Count Calvin went back fully grateful. "Your Majesty." At that, Adele smiled and shook her head, "Within my authority of what I can do." She remembered her mother's words, "Adele, you are smart. However, this world is a place established by smart people, but ruled by wise people. And that's why you need to be a wise person." She murmured. The reason she endured all humiliation and could not help but count, was because she has no power. In this unfamiliar land, she will take only wise action that will help her to gain power. "Your Majesty, why don't you request a meeting with His Majesty?" Mrs. Kick suggested. She said it would be good for her to maintain a cordial relationship with His Majesty. A relationship that is friendly and sincere but not overly close. Adele agreed with Mrs. Kick. Mrs. Kicks helps Empress to get ready for dinner. She applied light makeup to Adele's face. "You are beautiful, Mrs. Giggs sincerely praised Adele. Her reflection in the mirror was beautiful even when she saw herself. But strangely in a dirty mood, Adele bit her lip and lowered her gaze. Adele agreed with Mrs. Kick because she knew it was important to get along with the Emperor first. The scene shifts to the Emperor's palace. Attendant inform the Emperor that Empress has arrived. The moment Empress entered an Emperor's room, Emperor's attention was immediately drawn to her simple achromatic dress, a far cry from her usual bold red Empress's attire. Her black hair was styled to one side, exposing the nape of her neck and collarbones. Her natural pallor was emphasized in the dimly lit room, drawing his gaze to her collarbones that were accentuated by the flickering lanterns. Her golden eyes and clear red lips completed the captivating sight, and Karl found himself momentarily lost in her beauty. As she took a seat opposite him, he asked in a hushed voice, "What brings you to me tonight?" "I came because I thought it might not be time for dinner." "How about having dinner together?" Adele replied, hoping to change the subject. The Emperor was taken aback by Adele's suggestion but quickly regained his composure. "Even if it's not so, I was just about to contact you because I had something I wanted to ask you," he said. "Please speak," Adele replied. "Please speak," Adele replied. "Why did you summon Count Calvin?" The Emperor asked with a smile on his face. "Why did you call him Empress?" he demanded. Adele felt like she was facing a harsh north wind as she stared into the Emperor's cold, unrelenting eyes. She quickly regained her composure and replied, "I called him because I was worried about his situation," said Adele. "Why are you?" the Emperor replied. "What do you mean?" Adele asked. "His land is being destroyed by towers, but I did not save him. He just sent back the one who ran to save him." But the Empress called him again. From what he heard, the Empress seems to have given him gold bars. "What are you doing now?" the Emperor demanded. Adele wondered if the news of the gold bars had already reached the Emperor's ears. She was speechless with embarrassment as the Emperor continued to berate her. "You want to play a good role alone? Unlike the Emperor, the Empress has a generous heart. Do you want to hear this?" he accused Empress. Empress didn't understand what he is thinking. She then opened her mouth and said, "I summoned Count Calvin only to ask about his situation and gave him some advice on evacuating the fief citizens with some compensation money. Why are you interrogating me like I committed a sin? From now on, close your eyes and ears, see only good things, and think only good things, Empress," the Emperor spoke. "It's the least a human being could do to another human being." "Are you saying I'm not human?" the Emperor asked with a hint of amusement. He said, "It's funny, just because you're the Empress. Do you seriously believe that my people, whom you've never seen before, are your people, in such a short time, too?" Adele opened her mouth but quickly shut her eyes. She felt nauseous. He knew she couldn't stay like this any longer. She reminded herself that she only lived once and must seize the moment. She saw that the Emperor had lightly grasped her black hair, which was braided to one side. He ran his fingertips through her hair while gazing at her hollowed-out collarbone, so delicate that it seemed as thin as his fingers. Would it break if he squeezed it too hard? The Emperor impulsively tilted his head, and their shoulders almost collided. The tip of his nose touched her white nape, and Adele reflexively shrugged her shoulders and held her breath. The Emperor's jaw quivered, and he gritted his teeth. Pressing his nose to her collarbone, he took a deep breath, savoring her sweet scent. Was she the same woman who had dominated the crowd with her gaze? As the Emperor stood up, then he leaned close to Adele's face but stopped abruptly as he caught a glimpse of her golden eyes, fierce like those of a wild beast. Adele's stiff shoulders and raised eyes clearly reveal her anger. Seeing her fury, the Emperor tilted his head and smiled seductively. "Did you come to me tonight to spend the night with me? If you want a hug, I can give you one. It wouldn't hurt to have our first night tonight." Adele clenched her fists. The Empress had intended to wish her emperor well, but his expression, attitude, and inconsiderate words made her feel dirty and humiliated. She felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over her. I guess spending our first night today is not too bad. I'm going to kiss you, so close your eyes. Stop. Adele refused to close her eyes. Instead, she met the Emperor's gaze with pride. Karl raised his hand to touch her eyes, but Adele slapped it away. I know you were once the crown princess of Gottrov, and your eyes are truly fit for an emperor. But you are now the Empress. Do not forget that I am the emperor of this place. I prefer a compliant and submissive woman. Do not meddle in my work again. Do you understand? Then Emperor left the room. Adelaide's powerful legs, which had withstood a catastrophic disaster from the sky, trembled with weakness at the humiliation that had hit her like a tsunami. Her composure crumbled. Viewers, let me explain why Empress Adele suddenly feels sick. It's not because she is afraid, it's because her mana start overflowing again, cause of all her emotions. Your Majesty the Empress? Adele, lost in thought as she walked, came to a sudden halt at the sound of the voice. Your Majesty the Empress, the voice belonged to Diane Poitiers. A person Adelaide would least want to meet right now. Mistress. Your Majesty, your hands are trembling. Your body is shaking. Adele orders her to step aside. But Mistress stand there and said, Your Majesty, you look beautiful. Lit looks like you followed my advice. But something must have gone wrong. Is that why you're running away? What? Adele growled with a ferocious face, but Diane smiled and said one more word. It would be better if you apply the makeup a bit thicker, since you have a pale complexion. Well, I'll excuse myself now. Mistress and her maids left for the Emperor's room. As the Empress had a headache, she rushes. The moment she rushed down the stairs as if she was running away, her legs gave out, and her body leaned forward. Adele gritted her teeth and involuntarily closed her eyes tightly. However, as soon as she closed her eyes, she felt a firm force supporting her shoulders. Empress, are you all right? A low, soothing voice whispered into Adele's ear. She stared blankly at him for a moment, then muttered his name as if in a daze, Lionel Valgier. Balder. Suddenly, she snapped out of it, straightening her shoulders and mustering all her composure. Thank you. I just tripped. With a grateful nod, she quickly descended the stairs, not daring to look back. Lionel followed her with his eyes, still feeling something off about her demeanor. As she rushed down the stairs, she seemed almost wild, as if fleeing some unseen danger. When she stumbled, Lionel's reflexes kicked in, and he caught her by the shoulder to steady her. As he gazed down at his hand, he noticed how delicate and slender her shoulders were, barely able to support her. His palms tingled as if burned, and he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. The distorted and disheveled bare face of the Empress, who always presented herself with only a flawless figure, remained in Lionel's mind like an afterimage. She was the one who laughed so hard, Lionel thought to himself. Adele arrived at the Empress Palace. She was angry at what had happened, but the tears wouldn't stop. She soaked herself in the hot bathtub, rubbing off the makeup on her face and washing her body for what seemed like an eternity before muttering to herself. As she closed her eyes, she imagined her old nanny and her wrinkled eyes curved like the moon. Whenever Adele did something against her mother's opinion, she clung to her nanny for comfort. Tell me, nanny, what should I do? She muttered to herself. Her nanny's voice echoed in her mind. Walk on your own path. Your Highness. Do what you want. But remember to be modest about the results. Since that's the fate people like you have to endure, Your Highness, and the world is a place capable of changing people. You. Empress thought, I must develop my own power independently of the Emperor's power. Your spouse is out of luck, her mother's favorite fortune teller had told Adele. Princess Adelaide was lucky to be born. Her spouse's luck is greater than her parents' luck. And her child's luck is great. Alas, of course your parents are very lucky. Adele clicked her tongue and shook her head, finally muttering bitterly, Look, he's a complete quack cheater. Next morning, Mrs. Kix thought, the Empress returned to the palace last night, her face ashen. It caused Mrs. Kix's heart to skip a beat as the already pale countenance became even paler. Mrs. Kix had served as the general manager of the Imperial Palace for a long time. Although she no longer had influence over the ladies-in-waiting, her former colleagues remained in the palace, rushing to them. She inquired about what had happened, and she heard the entire account before dawn. She already looked unwell when she left the Emperor, and Diane Poitiers insulted you properly to make matters worse. The Minister of Defense caught her almost falling down the stairs, they informed her. Mrs. Kix was concerned that Adele might become ill due to her condition, but her worries were unfounded. Eat slowly, Mrs. Kix advised. The Empress nodded, but she continued to eat without pausing. Then an attendant arrived. What is it? Mrs. Kix asked. The attendant bowed politely and presented to the supplementary budget you mentioned earlier. The emergency budget supplementary has been completed, and I would like to ask you to review it, he said. Mrs. Kix quickly retrieved the envelope from the attendant and handed it to Empress. All eyes in the room were fixed on the Empress's expressionless face. Where did this document come from? Did the Emperor send you? No, Your Majesty. I am from the Ivory Palace. The Ivory Palace. They seem to have their hands in everything, the Empress remarked. She thought, I might get indigestion despite eating well. I never imagined that an emperor would entrust a concubine with the supplementary budget for the Empress's palace. It is a rarity to witness such an event in the present day. Wait here for a moment, have a servant escort him to a waiting room, and I will call for him later, the Empress ordered. Yes, Your Majesty, I understand, the attendant replied, relieved. The Empress raised her head and asked from Mrs. Kix, Do I have the authority to review the details of the total budget for the Imperial Palace? She inquired. Yes, Your Majesty, Giggs replied. I want to see it, please retrieve it for me, the Empress instructed. Mrs. Kix respectfully bowed her head, understood, Your Majesty. Adele perused the booklet containing the entire Imperial Palace budget and inspected the section allocated for the Empress's palace. Just how much was the written amount for you to do this, Your Majesty? She asked. Empress gave Mrs. Kix letter. Check it. What on earth is this amount? Adele asked, passing the paper to Mrs. Kix. The emergency supplementary budget amounted to no more than what was required to purchase a single horse. Adele examined the total budget that Mrs. Kix had presented with a cold, calculating gaze. Based on my common sense, the amount assigned to the Ivory Palace should also be granted to the Empress's palace, Empress said. Mrs. Kix hesitated and said, but Ivory Palace budget exceed the limit. Its budget is even higher than the Empress Palace. Scene shifts, the attendant arrived at Ivory Palace. Diane Poitiers calmly nodded her head, as if she had anticipated the situation. So you are telling me to allot the Empress Palace's budget again? Attendant nervously replied, Yes, Your Highness. Mistress. All right, let's begin. I'm not sure if this will satisfy you, she said. But, didn't you just say? The attendant began to protest. Will it take you half a day to get it? Take it to her at once. Right now, immediately, Diane interrupted. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the attendant hastily accepted the envelope. I will go and retrieve it immediately. Right now, the attendant said. You came back so soon. Does this mean that the Ivory Palace has the authority to allocate the supplementary budget? Adele questioned. Trying to make sense of the Emperor's decision-making process, the Empress followed through with the amount indicated on the second memo, but she trotted away the paper in frustration. She then ordered the attendant to return. Fine. You may go now, she said dismissively, causing the dejected attendant to shuffle out of the Empress Palace with drooping shoulders. Ah, felt bad for this guy, caught up between them. Meanwhile, the poor servant, who was being tossed back and forth, ran over to Diane and bowed his head. The Empress wants me to do it again, the servant said. It seems that the Empress wants to spend extravagantly despite being given enough funds. Tisk tisk, how typical, she said. Yes, my lord, a nearby lady-in-waiting quickly agreed, bowing her head. You've done well, you're free to go, she said. Diane dismissed all but Lorraine, then put on a modest dress, wiped off her makeup, and secretly ordered Lorraine to do the same. Now go to His Majesty and tell her that the Empress has summoned me for a supplementary budget, and be sure to tell her that I'm trembling with fear, Diane instructed. Her lady-in-waiting replied, Yes, Your Highness. Shall we go catch the black beast? Mistress said. Meanwhile, at the Empress Palace, Adele, who had been scouring through the archives, fortunately stumbled upon a clue shortly after. Yes, the Empress has the exclusive right to decide on the acquisition of a residence in the Imperial Palace. There was such a clause. It's written in the book. Even though the authority of the supplementary budget revision is solely under the Emperor, isn't this clause completely in my favor? But you must be careful. The Imperial Palace law is a double-edged sword. If you want to wield it, you must be willing to be bound by its rules. Mrs. Giggs warned. Adele smiled and gestured to the trash can. Look at me, asking the Emperor's mistress to increase the budget even though I'm the Empress and she raised it by a single silver bar. Can you believe it? The double-edged sword was wielded by the Emperor first. I've already shed enough blood, so to speak. I understand, Your Majesty. Mrs. Kix smiled softly. There is no room for objection. What can I do to reverse a decision that has already been made? If you want to withdraw a document that you've approved, you can retrieve it and issue a new order, Mrs. Kix explained. Adele smiled at the answer. Her golden eyes shone like the moon. She turned to her advisor and whispered, Madam, please obtain a residence permit for Diane Poitiers from the Ivory Palace. Mrs. Kix bowed respectfully. I understand, Your Majesty. It looked like someone is going to be homeless, hee. Empress Adele considering the various sources of power, family connections, that's irrelevant, she declared. Producing an air. Memories of someone's unwanted advances flashed in her mind, and she shook her head vehemently. That's not an option right now. She rejected the first two options without hesitation. That left two options. Relying on aids or building an independent power base. Adele had initially intended to focus on building a strong relationship with the Emperor before considering these options, but recent events had hardened her resolve. The supplementary budget from the Ivory Palace had made it clear that she needed to take matters into her own hands. Adele raised her pen again to write another verse. A drop of ink from the pen's tip fell, creating a black mark, but Adele didn't flinch. She turned her head with a stern gaze and looked out the window. A faint tremor, like a tingling sensation, passed through her from head to toe in the blink of an eye. The dormant magic that had been within her veins and deep inside her body reacted to something. It couldn't be. Adele muttered, gazing at the sky with a perplexed expression. Just then, her lady-in-waiting entered the room, announcing the arrival of a visitor. Your Majesty, Diane Poitiers wishes to see you. Adele raised an eyebrow in surprise. Despite sending an attendant, the visitor had still made the effort to come to her. After a moment of consideration, Adele gave her approval. Take me to the drawing room. As Adele entered the drawing room, Your Majesty the Empress, the lady-in-waiting announced. Did you bring the answer to the matter of sending the attendant personally? She asked. Yes, Your Majesty the Empress. That's correct, Diane replied. As the Empress continued to stare at her, Diane politely asked, I'm sorry, Your Majesty the Empress. What are you upset about? Adele managed to keep her composure. What am I upset about? Adele asked. Yes, Diane replied. Diane tilted her head with an innocent expression. Mrs. Kix gave Empress budget information. Empress asked from Mistress to take look of Ivory Palace budget. Your Majesty the Empress, with all due respect, why are you showing me these things? Diane asked. She thought. It seems she is finally using her position as Empress to pressure me. However, do you think it will be that easy, especially when she lacks His Majesty's affection and any of the nobles' support? Mistress was assured that Empress can't do anything. There is something I want to ask you, the Empress replied. What is it? Mistress asked. Why are there no usage details in the total budget of the Ivory Palace? The Empress inquired. Diane fell silent, taken aback by the question. The Empress continued. Is it for consumables, salaries, or VIP entertainment? All other institutions have usage histories. However, why does the Ivory Palace budget is only place which without any usage details written, not the amount paid and spent detail mentioned? It was an unexpected inquiry. Perhaps you have the answer. But why are you asking about the Ivory Palace budget? At Diane's question, Adele tilted her head with a genuine smile on her face. That's because the amount allocated to the Ivory Palace has to be transferred to the Empress Palace. While staring at his paperwork, the Emperor noticed the lady-in-waiting enter the room. He instinctively sat up, knowing that it was usually bad news when Diane sent one of her direct maids. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Your Majesty, the princess has been summoned to the Empress Palace," the lady-in-waiting replied. Carl's face was furrowed in confusion. Why would the Empress summon Diane? The princess submitted a budget proposal, but Her Majesty rejected it twice. When she went to the Empress Palace to discuss it, she was so frightened that she came to seek Your Majesty's guidance instead. Please forgive her impertinence, Your Majesty. The Emperor felt a wave of anxiety wash over him at the mention of Diane's fear. The sensation of a giant strangling him tightened in his chest. The darkness seemed to swallow him up. Memories of the past echoed in his mind. Someday, when you become emperor, will you accept me as your mother? Carl bit his lip hard and placed his hand on his forehead. Diane blinked in surprise at Adele's announcement. The budget for the Ivory Palace is being transferred to the Empress Palace, she repeated. Adele smiled at her with a puzzled expression, crossing her legs as she reclined on the sofa. Well, you have been taking on the Empress role, haven't you? That budget was allocated to you for that purpose. As I am now handling the Empress affairs, the budget should naturally be transferred along with it. Does that upset you? Diane remained silent as Adele leaned in, her golden eyes shining. You have put a lot of hard work into it. I won't ask you to submit a statement of use for it now. I can handle that. Just transfer all the allocated budget to the Empress Palace. It seems that the Emperor has given you that authority. Mistress thought. Empress did not make a proposal or request. She did not even wait for the Emperor to grant her authority. As the Empress, even without family or allies to support her, she had the power to command. With a single order, Diane had to surrender her rights that she had taken for granted for 3 years. She had no title in the imperial palace, and this fact made her angry. She had prepared for this moment for so long. But reality was still different from her imagination. Her whole body boiled with anger. Her eyes were red, and her face turned red with fever. Adele's expression was also frosty at the sight of Diane trembling with anger instead of accepting her forgiveness. She asked, "Are you upset?" But Diane, still lost in her thoughts, and tears kept falling from her eyes. This palace, this drawing room, the place beside His Majesty, the position beside him as a sovereign that could look down on all people. Those were all mine. Those were all supposed to be mine. They're mine. Adele remembered her past self in those tears. Step down from the heir position, Adelaide. Her mother's words. I lost my position so easily. Just from simple words. Do you think your place is gone because of me? She asked from Diane, but Diane did not answer. I am the Empress of Emont. Don't you dare challenge my authority. I will not forgive anyone who challenges the Empress's authority in any way. Do not think that she is taken away. Let her think well of what you originally had. Empress thought. Diane should not challenge the authority of the Empress. However, Adele was willing to offer Diane the best she had. This was the ultimate consideration for Diane. Diane clenched her fists tightly and glared at Adele. Diane had said that she would acknowledge everything except the Empress authority, but to Diane, even the Empress authority had long since become a part of her. It was hers. So Adele's proposal was wrong from the start. Her jaw trembled from how hard she clenched her teeth. Where is His Majesty? Why don't you come? Your Majesty, Diane muttered. And just then, the door to the Empress parlor was suddenly opened violently and without warning. Adele frowned and glared at the door, wondering who dared to open the Empress parlor door without permission. But then she saw Diane suddenly fall on her knees in front of her and cry out in a voice mixed with tears. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. It was sudden and simultaneous. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Please forgive me. Adele was embarrassed and involuntarily opened her mouth, widening her eyes. What is she doing now? Meanwhile, Carl's gaze was on Diane, who was lying on the floor. Disheveled blonde hair on the floor, a small, slender back, and a quivering tone. Carl slowly raised his eyes and looked at the Empress sitting in her chair. Empress, what are you doing now? There was deep anger and darkness in Carl's low-pitched voice. Wake up, Lady Poitiers. What are you doing? Talk to me now, Adele exclaimed. Empress, what is Your Majesty doing right now? Emperor asked. Carl gritted his teeth and stared at Diane, then looked back at the Empress. Escort Diane to the Ivory Palace, the Emperor commanded. Yes, Your Majesty, the servant replied. Everyone, please leave. I need to have a private meeting with the Empress, the Emperor instructed, and the ladies-in-waiting promptly left the room. It's been a long time, the Emperor greeted coldly, to which Mrs. Kix politely bowed her head. You look the same, the Emperor continued, sitting next to the Empress. I just watch as those weaker than her are trampled on. Is that fun? Adele, not understanding the situation, gave a sharp command to Mrs. Kix to leave, but the Emperor raised his voice even louder. Is that fun? He bellowed. Mrs. Kix, please leave, Adele shouted back, unfazed. The Emperor glared at her with a deadly gaze, and she returned the look, tightening her chin. Mrs. Kix calmed her trembling breath, bowed politely to the two of them, then turned around and left the room. What are you doing now, Empress? The Emperor asked. What are you doing, Your Majesty? Adele replied. Is it fun? Grabbing someone weaker than you by the neck and twisting them to make them beg for help is in bad taste. I've never done that before, Adele insisted. I saw it myself, and it sounds like an excuse, the Emperor retorted. As soon as the door opened, she collapsed and started begging me, just in time for Your Majesty's arrival. Isn't that a remarkable coincidence? The Emperor jeered at Adele. Adele let out a sigh and ran her fingers through her hair. Meanwhile, the Emperor lifted the Ivory Palace budget off the table. Do you desire this? Do you want what Diane has? It's not Diane who lacks self-control. It's you, Your Majesty. Have you even looked at the budget plan for the Empress Palace? What happened to the budget supplement? Don't you know, it was also entrusted to the Ivory Palace, an empress who receives money from the Emperor's mistress. Is that what you wanted? Adele laughed bitterly and continued speaking rapidly. Roughly, she pulled out the discarded supplementary budget statement and laid it on the table. This is the supplementary budget for the Empress Palace. Let's take a look. I wonder if it's even worth a horse. Is the supplementary budget for the Empress Palace so destitute that it's comparable to splitting expenses with a group of courtesans? The Emperor squinted as he gazed at the budget proposal from the Empress. As Adele had said, the supplementary budget was only enough to cover the cost of a stallion. Is that why you summoned Diane? I instructed her to revive the budget, and she came of her own accord. That's what you call it, Emperor said. Is that so? As Adele replied in an exasperated tone, Carl's eyes glinted menacingly. Slowly, he approached her. Like the previous night, the two of them locked gazes with a precarious distance between them. Your mother lied to Mother. They said she was an obedient and devoted daughter. Has she not realized anything since she was banished from her motherland? The Emperor asked. Don't say anything about the reasons why I had to leave Gotrov without knowing them properly, Adele replied. Listen carefully, Empress, Carl said as he grabbed Adele's shoulders tightly, like a feather on a quill, like flowers in a vase. It was a mechanical answer to someone's question about who the Empress of Emont was. Suddenly, there was a loud noise that shook the palace. Flashes of light and echoes filled the air, and in an instant, Adele quickly ran to the terrace, and as she opened the door, the wind hit her whole body. She held onto the railing and raised her head to the sky, screaming. Suddenly, chaos erupted in the palace. A black catastrophe, like death itself, was running fast toward the Emont Imperial Palace. Adele stared at it with an unwavering gaze, like a feather on a quill, like flowers in a vase. Will you live like that? She repeated what the Emperor had said. Mrs. Kix rushed in, her face betraying her surprise as she shouted, "Your Majesty, are you okay? They say the tower is collapsing, and Her Majesty the Empress needs to evacuate immediately." "No, absolutely not," Empress replied. The capital had issued an emergency order. The situation was dire, especially considering the tower was collapsing perilously close to the imperial palace. Chaos erupted in the palace like a hive of disturbed bees. An evacuation order was swiftly issued. Employees began to flee in droves. Amidst the commotion, Lionel Balder, the Minister of Defense and leader of the Knights, rushed towards the descending tower. "Knights said it's looked like a 4-level tower," Lionel replied. "Fortunately, it's descending on a garden. It would be harder to resolve if it landed on a building. Everyone, get in your positions. Maintain the line. When the tower reaches 50 feet above the ground, the magicians will come. Until they come, we need to block it." "Understood," all knights answered. Lionel scanned his surroundings and asked, "Are the magician coming?" "Not yet, Your Excellency, we've received no word," came the reply. Despite the tower's rapid descent, the magician had yet to appear. Lionel had seen this scenario play out before. They only emerged after enough knights had died. "Go to the magician's official residence immediately and summon them," he ordered. "Understood, sir." Upon Lionel's orders, the vice-captain swiftly turned and vanished. Individuals capable of freely using magic to combat the tower's magic were referred to as wizards. In Emont, the country's wizards were managed by the Imperial Magic Corps, which was a military force under the direct jurisdiction of the Emperor rather than the Ministry of National Defense. Wizards were mainly divided into 2 types: offensive wizards, known as strikers, and defensive wizards, known as keepers. The Imperial Wizard Commander was Duke Auguste Ulrich de Spoin, and the Vice-Captain was Count Lennox Poitiers, who was a first-class striker and the top magician in Emont, despite being a commoner. His rank as an heritable count was well-deserved. Lennox Poitiers looked at Henri Jackal, the Vice-Captain of the Royal Guard, who had rushed over with a grim expression. "So?" Lennox asked casually as he buttoned up his robe, despite the Vice-Captain's fierce glare. "You want me to come now?" Henri Jackal spoke through clenched teeth. "It's an order from the Minister of Defense. Assemble the wizards immediately in the Rose Garden where the tower is descending." Lennox chuckled and adjusted his crooked robes. "Are you in trouble now? We're under the direct jurisdiction of His Majesty. We don't have to listen to the Minister of Defense's orders, you know." Henri Jackal gritted his teeth, and Lennox continued, "Oh, my mistake. You're in a hurry. Fine, you go ahead." Despite his words, Lennox's movements remained leisurely as he adjusted his robes and checked himself out in the mirror. Henri Jackal clenched his fists tightly in frustration. "Sir Jackal, did your salary not come through this month? If any of your subordinates are struggling financially, let me know. I can spare one of my gold leaf buttons for them," Lennox joked. "Enough talk. Be ready," Henri Jackal warned, to which Lennox just laughed and moved closer to him. "Henri Jackal, you can't go out like that. Do you need my help right now? The longer I delay, the more damage the knights will suffer, don't you agree?" Lennox asked. "The tower has descended upon the Imperial Palace. Do you think the wizards will be okay?" "The Imperial Palace magicians will not be able to avoid responsibility either," Henri replied. Lennox smiled and pulled out a gold-plated button from his pocket, dropping it at his feet. The button made a loud noise as it rolled around a corner. "I don't care," he said. Henri was left speechless. "Even if the magician are criticized later, I won't be. If the world were to turn into hell, it wouldn't matter to me as long as I'm not in that hell. So, Henri Jackal, don't insult me, because it won't end well for you," Lennox warned as he tapped Henry's shoulder and walked away slowly. Henri closed his eyes in frustration. Despite the humiliation, he knew that if the magicians did not come, the knights would be left to fight the tower alone, and the consequences would be catastrophic. He resisted his displeasure. With a deep breath, he politely bowed his head. "And I seek the cooperation of the magician," Henri said, and Lennox couldn't contain his joy. Lennox's light blue eyes flashed in excitement. The black plague that descended from the sky was a blessing to him, and he relished the power it gave him over the aristocratic knight. As a massive tower plummeted towards the ground, a fierce updraft swept through the area, causing chaos and destruction. Have magician arrived? Lionel asked. No, they haven't, Knight replied. Lionel thought, in the end, they won't come on time again. The least I can do is try to protect more of my subordinates. Why are you just standing there? A voice came. Lionel was surprised by the unexpected voice, which seemed completely out of place in the chaotic scene. A gust of wind blew the woman's hair around her face as she skillfully tied it back. Your Majesty the Empress, Lionel gasped as Empress Adelaide suddenly appeared amidst the disaster. Dangerous. Go back, Sir Leopard. Lionel shouted, shielding the Empress from the gusts of wind that buffeted them. He was about to appoint one of his aides to escort her to safety when she finally spoke. Yes. Lionel wasted no time in delegating the task to one of his trusted men. Take Her Majesty and move to a safe place, now. Sir Leopard squinted at the tower, his gaze fixed on its trajectory. Why are there no magicians? Can't they destroy it before it reaches us? Or are they waiting for it to hit the ground? The Empress shot Lionel a questioning look, but he had no time to answer. Hurry, Your Majesty. It's not just the tower that poses a threat. Look out for the glass shards. Just as the glass shards were about to strike, something transparent appeared out of nowhere, intercepting them with a gentle push. They were swept away by the wind, leaving Lionel and the Empress unscathed. Magician? Lionel muttered, wondering if the wizards had finally arrived. Sir Lepat scanned the area, his eyes roving in search of the source of the mysterious force that had saved them. It's level 4, which is close to level 5. So there's no reason to wait, she said, her words confident and cool. Before Lionel could react, she began to run like a black panther towards the thunder and lightning. He followed closely behind, but as the Empress lifted herself into the air with an updraft, Lionel reached out to grab her shoulder. Adele clicked her tongue and pushed his hand away with magic. Don't worry, do not interrupt. As the Empress charged towards the tower, Lionel felt the magical power pushing him back. He looked up to see the Empress throw herself at the tower without hesitation. Before she had time to stop, Lionel stomped his right foot hard and propelled himself into her updraft. No! The knights cried, looking on in shock as Empress Adelaide flew into the sky, but Lionel quickly regained his senses, recalling the Empress's warning not to disturb her. She had been crystal clear. Prepare for the Empress to fall, Lionel said with a firm voice as he gazed at the towering inferno before them. We need to put out those flames before they consume the whole tower, Lionel commanded. Lennox nodded and immediately sent one of his wizards to do as he was told. Lionel then turned to the knights and said, Get ready to create a human chain. We need to get up there and save Her Majesty if she's still alive. The knights nodded and prepared themselves for the dangerous task ahead. As they were about to start their ascent, the tower shook violently, and a loud explosion echoed through the air. Lionel and the others looked up in horror as debris rained down on them. The tower was collapsing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it, he thought. A well-fitted training uniform sword attached to her back and a strong magic that pushed me. He remembered her chat with Count. A tower with spawning aerial monsters is classified as level 4. I'm sure she was saying that. Then, is it possible that Her Majesty? When I'm falling after removing a tower, the sight of the sky distancing in flashes, is a scene known only to me. She remembered her subcoordinate's words. Can you please stop doing that? What if you end up dying from it? Don't throw cold water on my hobby, Gibelline. Although it's a hobby that often lead to my apprehension. Now, shall we land gently? Adele said as she turned her body over to look at the ground, only to be taken aback by one of her men, arms outstretched in anticipation of her fall, his beautiful face radiating a resolute determination to catch her. Adele quickly conjured up her magic to slow her descent, causing Lionel to lower his arms as the Empress's fall decelerated considerably. The Empress descended slowly to the ground, as if descending from the heavens, with the halo of light and pale rose sky behind her. Lionel and Adele locked gazes. Did you try to catch me with your arms? She asked with a hint of amusement. I was planning on it, Lionel replied. Otherwise, my arms wouldn't be out like this. You are a knight using your arms. You might lose your arms if you do that, Empress said. All this time, I have had people who scolded me for this. No one had come rushing to her aid during her fall. Even if some had chided her for it. Anyway, thank you for your kind gesture. At her words, Lionel snapped out of his trance and watched as the Empress strode away. Wasn't she the one who had fled with a disheveled appearance just yesterday? How could she be so carefree and light-hearted after a single day? He could still feel the warmth of her slender shoulders in his hands. Lionel stared at Adele's retreating back, his palms still ablaze as they had been the previous night. He wasn't the only one unable to take his eyes off the Empress. Her entourage stood there. "Put away your sword. It seems unnecessary," Adele instructed Lennox, who blinked in surprise. She then walked away, leaving him to ponder over her words. After a moment of silence, someone broke it with a hollow question that echoed through the ruined rose garden. Did Her Majesty the Empress really take down the tower alone? Now Empress Adele went back to her Empress Palace after defeating Tower. Mrs. Kicks, she is worried for Empress and wonder how did Tower suddenly disappear in thin air. Then she hears sound of footsteps. She turned around and saw Empress Adele came back. She asked, "Your Majesty, where did you go and from where did you got this dresses?" And she was worried about her. Empress Adele informed her that she went to destroy Tower. Mrs. Kicks gets startled. She asked what Your Majesty, but then suddenly Empress collapsed on floor. Mrs. Kicks panicked. Meanwhile, the nobility whispered rumors of a different ilk, their tongues wagging in hushed tones. "Do you mean to say that Her Majesty single-handedly destroyed the tower?" one noblewoman asked incredulously. "By the gods, are you implying that the Empress is a wizard herself? She flew into the sky and obliterated the tower with her own two hands. What madness is this?" one person said. "I know," people agreed with him. "Could it have been destroyed before the tower even touched the ground? And what does that make her? A striker, perhaps?" The Duke of Despoin is undoubtedly attempting to enslave the Empress, but to think that she destroyed the tower all on her own. Is her class not higher than that of Lennox Poitiers? Strange indeed, agreed. And what if the Empress were to accept Duke Despoin's offer? To be subservient to a group that includes Diane Poitiers' brother, Lennox Poitiers. What would that entail for their relationship? One person said, "Why would Gotrov send a princess, one who is such a powerful wizard, to Aemont?" The group fell into a contemplative silence, mulling over the question at hand. Lionel pushed back the locks that obscured his eyes and gazed up at the clear blue sky. The memory of the fiery red hue that had adorned the heavens mere moments ago felt like a distant dream hallucination. The warm gusts of late summer wind stirred the air, carrying with them a handful of leaves that had prematurely shed from the trees of autumn. "It's level 4, which is close to level 5. So I don't have to wait." Her words echoed in his mind, crystal clear as if etched onto his brain. Lionel had tried to catch her as she fell, but all he had felt was the weight of her thin, fragile shoulders in his palms before her powerful magic had pushed him away. The sight of her was more overwhelming than any disaster he had ever witnessed. Flames that poured like molten gold, eyes that glinted with a fierce light that surpassed even the fire, and black hair that cascaded down like a waterfall. She is indeed an outstanding one. Meanwhile, Duke Despoin had rushed to the magician's official residence and burst through the door. He shouts, "Lennox!" At the sound of the Duke's voice, Lennox Poitiers quickly emerged. "Your Excellency, the Duke." Duke Despoin turned to Lennox and spoke in a hushed and urgent tone. "You are saying that the Empress is a wizard?" His face betrayed his anxiety and displeasure at encountering an unexpected twist. Lennox simply nodded. "That's correct." Duke asked, "Is it true that she destroyed the tower alone, without any other wizard's help?" Lennox hesitated for a moment before replying, "Yes, that's correct." Duke Despoin frowned and took a step back, mind working furiously to calculate the implications of this newfound knowledge. He spoke again. "The Empress is a wizard. She is an amazing person." Lennox, his confident demeanor shattered in an instant as he watched the tower collapse before his eyes. And then the impossible happened. The one who had single-handedly destroyed the tower was none other than the Empress herself. Lennox was taken aback. He had never imagined that the Empress, who had been married off to the Emperor as if she were a mere pawn, would turn out to be a wizard, let alone a striker. It was a revelation that would have caught even the Emperor off guard. "Truly remarkable. You are a great talent." The Empress Gotrov neglected to mention something rather important. Duke Despoin's voice was cold and grim, his long platinum hair sweeping across his face. Lennox couldn't shake off the ominous feeling that crept up his spine, causing goosebumps to form on his skin and beads of sweat to run down his back. Something told him that this was just the beginning of an unpredictable and perilous journey. Lennox wasted no time once the Duke had departed. Sprinting towards the ivory palace with determination etched into his features, he barged in room and shouted Diana. Diana, who was sitting in her room, looked at him and said, "Brother, how many times I have told you to knock on door." "Are you still not pregnant?" he asked, causing Diane to recoil. "Please, stop saying that. Do you think pregnancy is something that can be forced?" she exclaimed. "What are you going to do now?" Lennox demanded. "What am I supposed to do?" Diane retorted. "The Empress is a wizard," Lennox snarled, his face contorted with anger. Diane's eyes widened in shock at the revelation. "Is the Empress a wizard?" she asked. "Indeed," Lennox confirmed, "and she's the one who caused the tower to disappear." Diane closed her eyes in dismay, unable to believe what she was hearing. It was all so unexpected, and she felt powerless to do anything about it. In that moment, she felt like nothing more than a mere puppet being pulled this way and that. She thought Empress Adele is mere puppet, and she can manipulate her. Duke Despoin said he was a great talent. "What if he see me as worthless?" Lennox asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Diane sneered at her brother's words, her anxiety mounting. "If my brother was brought here, it's because he has potential," she replied. "Stop doubting yourself and start protecting the wizards. I'll protect you. Nothing has changed. You have always been best mages in Emont. Don't waver. Get your HAED straight up and take care of Magic Division, and I will take care of His Majesty." Lennox's expression softened at Diane's words, and he began to feel a sense of calm creeping over him. "You're right," he said softly. Lennox nodded in agreement. "And besides, even if you're not pregnant, the king is still wrapped around your finger, isn't he?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. "Stop saying that," Diane protested, "and please be careful." Lennox grinned at her. "Of course. You know me," he said, as they stared at each other. He said, "Of course, after all, Empress is alone, what she can do." Diane's expression grew dark. "We've endured so much already, only to be brought low by this. It's not fair," she said bitterly. She said, "Have faith, brother," Diane said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate with power. "It doesn't matter if the Empress is a wizard or not. In the end, we will be the last ones laughing. The world may take and take, but we will always have each other." Scene shift to Empress Palace. After defeating the monster tower without anyone's help, Adele is called Bravado. The tower was the epicenter of magic, and its absence would cause the mana to dissipate, unleashing untold chaos. Adele pushed herself to the limit. She slept as if she were dead, groaning in agony as if her body had been battered. Mrs. Kix watched the Empress contort and make strange noises with a worried expression etched on her face. Though Adele's forehead didn't feel hot to the touch, Mrs. Kix couldn't shake her concerns. She left the room, knowing full well what the Empress was up to, and soon others learned of it too. The palace was in turmoil, abuzz with rumors of the Empress destroying the tower alone. Gossip and whispers spread like wildfire, and everyone seemed to be in on the secret. I said, "She did it alone," someone exclaimed in disbelief. "It's true. The guards are practically bursting with excitement," another said. "What about the other mage?" someone else asked. "Late to the party. I heard the Empress arrived after the tower was already destroyed." Yet another voice chimed in. "If not for Her Majesty, the royal guard would have suffered great losses," someone else added. Mrs. Kix quickly drafted a letter and handed it to one of her trusted aides. "Take this to His Highness the Grand Duke immediately," she commanded, her tone brooking no arguments. "Go quickly while chaos still reigns in the palace." As the Emperor stood lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the ominous black tower against the blood-red sky, the imperial palace suddenly erupted into chaos, but he remained calm, knowing that a tower of that size could be easily taken down. His aide informed him that "The tower is coming, Your Majesty. Please hurry up and evacuate." Emperor replied, "Shut up, and stop making a big deal out of it." He thought it's a no big deal to take care to tower of that size. Perhaps he could order its destruction at the right time. As he pondered his options, a strange feeling washed over him. It was as if the wind had died down and the sky had faded to a lighter shade of red. And there, it was a brilliant white tower crumbling before his eyes. He thought, the wizards had done it. But the news that reached him soon after was nothing like what he expected. What? Who destroyed the tower? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It is said that Her Majesty the Empress destroyed it alone, came the answer. The Emperor was stunned into silence. He stared down at his hand, still tingling from the shock of electricity that had coursed through it when he gripped the Empress' shoulder. All information he had been given was the gender and name of the late Empress of Gotrovas's daughter, but now he had to wonder. It is possible that the Empress Dowager of Gotrov had sent her daughter away to Ichmont because she couldn't handle the responsibility? Determined to find out the truth, he summoned the shadow responsible for his secret work. Go to Gotrov, he commanded. Find out about Princess Adelaide's track record. His aide bowed and replied, I understand, Your Majesty. Scene shifts back to Empress Palace. Mrs. Kix came to visit Empress Adele and ask about her well-being. Are you awake, Your Majesty? How are you feeling? She saw Empress and her eyes widen. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the window, Empress Adelaide stirred from her slumber. The rumors about her latest decision had spread like wildfire throughout the city, and she knew it was time to take action. With a determined air, she ordered her attendants to stir up the still unquiet capital once more. I shall issue an aid notice, she declared, her voice firm and resolute. Mrs. Kick's face instantly lightened up. Empress continued. The eligibility criteria are unmarried men over the age of 20, except if they have a fiancé. The selection process shall be conducted through interviews, and the number of chosen candidates is yet to be determined. Mrs. Kix asked, and what shall be the selection criteria, Your Majesty? Adelaide paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room. Only my heart, she finally replied, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. Mrs. Giggs closed her eyes and bowed respectfully to the Empress, who smiled enchantingly, pleased with her faithful servant's response. The imperial capital's upper echelons were abuzz with the news of the Empress's call for aids. The mere act of recruiting assistants was enough to pique everyone's interest, but the fact that the Empress herself, a formidable striker who had shattered the tower just the day before, had issued the announcement had the nobles on the edge of their seats. Prince Balder was no exception. What is this announcement all about? Why the requirement is so simple? Michael Rosen, the Duke's chief secretary, mused as he perused a single document, swiping back and forth over it. Theseus sighed, his shoulders drooping. He spoke, it's actually better than a detailed one. But, Your Grace, Michael pressed on, don't you think this is rather vague? Theseus rubbed his temples and pursed his lips. He said, what's Her Majesty's intention? Is the Empress looking to challenge Her Majesty's rule or to establish her own power base against Diane Poitiers? He pondered aloud. He looked up at his younger brother, Lionel, who was sitting across from him, his arms folded and eyes fixed on the announcement. Lionel, what do you think? Theseus called out to him, hoping to get his opinion. Lionel turned his gaze toward his brother, his deep blue eyes meeting Theseus's. I don't know, I don't think it either. Or maybe she just wants to have some fun and pick someone she likes, because the selection requirement is someone I like, the Duke's secretary interjected. Theseus said, regardless, the Empress has put out a call for aids, and we cannot ignore it. Whom should we entrust with this task? Secretary speaks. Who could be entrusted with the crucial task of serving as the Empress's aide, with the under attack from the Emperor? Finding a trustworthy individual to assist the Empress was of the utmost importance. The chosen candidate would need to meet a specific set of requirements: a close bond with the Balder family, approval from the Empress, the ability to devise a plan to challenge the Emperor's power while serving as an aide, being an unmarried man over the age of 20 without a fiancé, and the fortitude to endure the inevitable loss of honor that comes with such a position, called Empress Lover. And that's why, for generations, the Empress aides have always been the second or third sons of powerful families. Breaking the silence, Lionel spoke out of turn. Her Majesty gave Count Calvin a gold bar. His Majesty must have been very displeased, he said, his words seeming to have no connection to the topic at hand. Perplexed, Theseus asked, "What do you mean, Lionel?" "It's an aid notice from the Empress," Lionel replied, his voice steady and calm. "Perhaps Her Majesty's view of the tower is different from the current wizards." Theseus asks, "Do you have someone to recommend?" Lionel replied, "I will apply for myself." Theseus gets startled. He replied, "What? No, you should think again." Lionel asked from secretary, "Do you have someone suitable enough to recommend?" "I don't think so." Secretary replied, "Well, I think the 3 sons of Count Verdi are quite close in age." Theseus stated, nonchalantly, "The youngest hasn't even reached 20 yet." Theseus began to protest. "There's nothing for you to gain by going. The Empress is bringing in her aide to impress Her Majesty and to send a warning to Diane Poitiers. Everyone will talk behind you for being her lover." Lionel countered, "As I have any honor left behind, to ruin it, we can't recede anymore. Just yesterday that Lennox Poitiers intentionally dawdled around despised my order for backup. However, I can't complain about that at Magic Division, even though in the Minister of Defense." Theseus glared at Michael before Michael continued, "Lionel has a point. We know very little about the wizards, towers, and witch beasts that are plaguing Emont. Even our attempts to steal information from other countries have failed due to it being a national secret, and we lost a person when we sent them to Gotrov. The Empress likely knows more than we do, and by becoming her aide, Lionel could gain valuable information to help us move forward." Theseus took a sip of his cold tea and furrowed his brow as he considered his brother's argument. Lionel continued, "At least if I become the Empress aide, we can take a step forward." "Theseus, please say yes so that these 2 lovebirds can be together and we viewers can be at peace." Theseus said, "All right, the Empress aide." Theseus couldn't help but feel uneasy about the situation and lamented, "If our mother were still alive, she would have slapped me for letting you do this." Lionel smiles and said, "I will take it as you allowed me." Michael posed an important question. He said, "Sorry to interrupt you, but what if the Empress doesn't choose Lionel? I wonder why both of you are so confident about it." Both Baldir brothers gave Michael death stare. He nervously replied, "Of course, there is no reason still to reject you. It's Lionel Baldir after all. Please dress nicely when you go to Her Majesty." Scene shifts to Emperor Palace. As Diane gazed upon Carl, her heart sank at his preoccupation with her paperwork. It had been an entire day since their last encounter, which had taken place at the Empress Palace. Anxiety shimmered in Diane's cerulean eyes as she struggled to keep her composure. Cold sweat dripped down her spine, and she took a deep breath as chills coursed through her chest. Carl saw Diana's face and he suggested, "If you're tired, you should go rest at the palace. You don't have to be here." She replied, "I apologize for worrying you, Your Majesty. I heard that the Empress has issued an announcement to hire an aide." Diane said cautiously, choosing her words carefully. "It hasn't been even a month since she got married, but now she is trying to hire one in less than a month. I can't help but worried it could be a problem for Your Majesty." Carl cut her off abruptly, his tone icy. "It's nothing for you to worry about. Just focus on your duties." Diane blinked in surprise, taken aback by the Emperor's dismissive tone, and he only met her with a cold gaze, leaving her feeling perplexed. She then turned around and said, "Then now I will excuse myself, Your Majesty." Emperor said, "Take a proper care of the Empress Palace budget revision, so that no more commotion is caused from it." Hearing Emperor words, her steps unsteady, and tears streaming down her face. She felt a deep sadness, knowing that Carl was both her heaven and her hell. In this moment, she felt cast into hell by the Emperor's cold eyes, tone, attitude, and every word. It was all too easy for him to turn her world into a paradise, only to then plunge it into despair so painfully. I hope now she understand the difference between wife and mistress. As Carl sat in his chambers, his emotions roiled like crashing waves, threatening to consume him. He called his aide, order him, report to me the current situation about Her Majesty's aide recruitment. Aide replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." Then after few times Aide report him. Currently, there are 16 applicants. Baron Armand's firstborn, Viscount Belvitz. Emperor thought. It was only made this morning, yet the response has been swift and overwhelming. He couldn't help but smile wryly at the eagerness with which families sent their children to vie for the prestigious position of the Empress aide. He knew the Empress' magical prowess had drawn much attention, and he wondered how the dynamics of the court would shift with her new aide. He asked, "Is there anyone from Baldir family?" Aide replied, "Currently no one." Emperor said, "Report me immediately if you got any new news about it. There is no way Duke Valgir or the Minister of Defense will personally apply for it. Thus, they will send someone from a family related to them." Scene shifts to Empress Palace. Hannah Giggs, known for her encyclopedic knowledge, Hannah's insight was invaluable, and she didn't hesitate to share her thoughts, and that concludes my report introducing the core politics of each mont. Empress is amazed from Mrs. Kick's knowledge. She praised her. She said, "No wonder the lady favored you, you're indeed amazing." Mrs. Kicks replied, "I am grateful, Your Majesty." While looking at report, Empress said, "Considering the current circumstances, it would be wise to extend an invitation to the Balder family." Empress put down the report and said, "Anyway, now shall we start interviewing the applicants for my aide?" As the doors of the Empress Palace opened to officially begin the interviews, the nervous interviewers lined up to meet Her Majesty. First applicant arrived. He opened his mouth and said, "Your Majesty the Empress, the moment I met you, I couldn't believe my eyes. If there is an angel, this is it." "I thought so," gushed one of the candidates, overwhelmed by Adele's presence. "Me, an angel? My nickname was the Witch of Gotrov," Adele thought. Applicant 2. "It's such an honor to meet you, Your Majesty. I couldn't even look at your face, so I lowered my head and only saw the tips of your toes. I'm so nervous. This moment feels like a dream," stammered another candidate, struggling to contain their awe. "I feel like I'm in a dream too," Adele said, trying to keep her composure. Another candidate interjected enthusiastically, "I am really strong, Your Majesty." Another one said, "Your Majesty, my specialty is singing. Would you like to hear it?" Empress screamed in her thought, "No, please stop." After the last candidate left, Adele slumped onto the sofa, exhausted. She thought, "That's why paperwork is necessary for process. There isn't a single applicant who can understand my announcement meaning." She thought an applicant from Baldir family hasn't shown up yet. Mrs. Kick said to Empress, "If you are tired, should I send them back?" Empress replied, "It's almost over, isn't?" Mrs. Kick, "Yes indeed." Empress continued, "Please guide them in. I think it would be better to wrap things as quickly as possible and then rest afterward." Mrs. Kicks went outside and called next applicant. She was shocked. A man in a sleek black suit had entered, drawing everyone's attention. His jet black hair and piercing blue eyes caught the light, and the badge on his chest, featuring crossed swords and a black panther, demanded respect. It was Lionel Baldir. Now, my dear friends, I know you must be wondering why Duke Despoin is in charge of the magic division and why the Emperor wants his side. Actually, Duke Despoin is also a magician, and why he didn't fight against Monster Tower. His thinking is similar like Empress Adele's mother, who wants to hold highest authority, and wanted to be seen as godlike figure among humans, and want to look down on everyone else. Well, now our manhwa ends here. Thank you, my friends, subscribing to this channel. I hope you understand my problem. Thanks for watching. If you want to support us, please check the description. Thank you again, my friends. Bye and take care.